Good afternoon. The Design Review Board 2 public meeting of June 18th, 2009 is called to order. Please refrain from talking amongst yourselves during the meeting, and please turn off or put on vibrate all cell phones and pagers. If you need to talk, please leave the meeting room. Anyone who wishes to speak, including applicants, is asked to completely fill out one of the speaker's cards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff. You will be called to present a case or speak on a specific item as desired. Anyone who wishes to be re-noticed about a project must completely fill out one of the postcards provided at the table by the front door and submit it to staff to receive further notice of subsequent meetings. Current DRB agendas are available by calling our DRB hotline at 818-548-3171 or by visiting our website at www.ci.glendale.ca.us. A handout describing the procedures of the meeting, possible board decisions, and DRB reconsideration and appeals is available at the table by the front door. Please note that appeals must be filed within 15 calendar days of the DRB decision date. The chairperson may reorder agenda items at his or her discretion. Roll call. Mr. Baladian?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Present.
Mr. Garagos?
Here.
Mr. Malikian?
Here.
Mr. Zaricki is absent. Report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on the bulletin board outside City Hall at or before 5 p.m. on June 11th of 2009. Oral communications. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak on an item that's not a part of tonight's agenda?
Well, we don't have any cards.
No cards? Okay, thanks. We are on to the review calendar. Actually, though, before we do that, staff would request that we move up the approval of the minutes if possible.
Okay.
Is that okay? We've got two sets of minutes, May 7th and June 4th.
Okay. Have you guys had a chance to review the May 7th?
Was May 7th was emailed. Was it part of the board packet?
I'm sorry. I know it was emailed.
Yes.
It was not a part of the board packet.
I didn't see the 7th. Does anybody have a copy of the 7th?
Would you like us to continue it for the next?
No, I was present. No. While I'm doing this, maybe I'll move acceptance of the minutes for June 4th.
Okay.
Second.
A motion was made to approve the June 4th minutes. This will be a roll call. Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Garagos?
Yes.
Mr. Baladian?
Yes.
And Mr. Malikian?
Abstain. I was absent.
And we need a motion for the other set.
May 7th.
Right.
Oh, okay. I thought you were looking at it. I thought you were going to do it. Make a motion to approve minutes for Thursday. Is it?
This is June 4.
It's,
May 7th.
May 7th.
May 7.
Approve minutes for May 7th.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay. Motion was made to approve the minutes of May 7th of 2009. Roll call. Mr. Garagos?
Yes.
Mr. Carter?
Yes.
Mr. Baladian?
Yes.
Mr. Malikian?
Yes.
Motion carries
Mr.
4-0.
Garagos, if you can sign the June 4th. You were the pro temp.
All right, we are on to the, actually, at this point, we don't have any staff announcements. There's nothing on the consent calendar. There is one application on the review calendar tonight.
Okay. All right, so are we ready? Case number 2 PDR 2009-032-A.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the board. The first item before you actually is located at 630 North Louise Street. Project applicant is Domus Design. The project involves the construction of a new two-story multifamily building consisting of 3 units with semi-subterranean 7-car garage and is located on a 5,327 square foot lot. Again, the lot is currently vacant, and the frontage is 34 feet wide, and the reason why I'm noting that because it is quite a narrow lot. However, the depth is more in keeping with the rest of the rectangular-shaped lots in the neighborhood, which is 160 feet deep. The lot is located on the northeast end of the 600 block of North Louise Street, abutting the 134 freeway. So you're going up North Louise, and then you have the 134 right before you enter that bridge. It's right there at the corner. The project consists of 3 attached 2-bedroom residential dwelling units ranging from 1,051 square feet to 1,108 square feet. And again, it consists of a 7-car semi-subterranean garage. Each of the units are 2-bedroom. And regarding the zoning for the property, it is R1250, which is high-density residential zone. I can approach the board at this time, just kind of walk you over the plans, and then kind of go over some sections in the report. And if you have any questions, I'm available throughout the presentation.
Do we have any perspectives?
You know, the applicant, I thought, was going to provide at today's meeting. I don't have a rendering perspective, no. So, besides what I have, that's all I have at the board, pinned up. I don't know if the applicant has, did you end up bringing one? No. So this is Louise Street and the 134 freeway to the north. We have access to the property, again, from Louise. The property is zoned multifamily, so you have a variety of multifamily buildings throughout the neighborhood, generally consisting of anywhere from 2 to 3 stories in height. Primarily, I saw more 3 stories when I was driving through the neighborhood than the 3. I think there was I only counted like 2 two-story buildings. So the project to the south, or the building to the south, is 3-story, and the building to this, actually to the east, behind the property, is 2 stories in height. But in this particular case, it is 2-story, so it is consistent in that respect. Going into the design guidelines and staff analysis, as noted in your report, there are no multifamily design guidelines adopted by the city for multifamily. However, again, the neighborhood context, as viewed in the photographs and throughout the neighborhood, is primarily consisting of multifamily residential buildings. Though this residential neighborhood has no prevailing architectural style, one thing to keep in mind is the mass and scale of the newer 2- and 3-story multifamily buildings. And in this case, they generally, it appeared to be more of this boxy look, and, you know, when reviewing or when looking at some of the buildings in the neighborhood, and their simple forms, and of course their colors which are generally muted or earth tone colors. As far as the site plan is concerned, again, this 3-unit project is designed in more of an asymmetrical building form. There are 2 stories, or it is 2 stories in height, with a semi-subterranean garage, which again has access from Louise Street. At the same time, the lot has a rectangular shape compared to other lots in the neighborhood, so that is a consistency, with the exception, as I alluded to earlier, of the narrow 34-foot width. Unlike other buildings in the neighborhood, the proposal is designed with fewer units, 2 units at the front and 1 unit at the rear. And they have, what's interesting, and again, I'll go more into depth with respect to this, but it has a break in the center of the building. However, by definition, it is considered attached because it's attached with an actual architectural element or feature. But again, I'll go more into detail with respect to that in the section that covers more of the architectural design and detailing. So as we view the elevations, we have the front facing Louise Street here. And this would be the south elevation, that would be the rear, and then we have the north side fronting, well, in this case it would be abutting the 134 sound barrier wall. As far as outdoor open space and landscaping, the common open space area is situated in the center of the lot, again, in that break that we see in the site plan, between the two buildings, and it features benches and landscaping and a fountain. Again, areas just for the residents to congregate, making it more accessible, more integrated with the building itself, and more functional. As far as mass and scale is concerned, the project or the proposed height of the building does not exceed 23 feet. So again, it is in keeping with the requirement of 26 feet overall height from the lowest to the top of the building. And of course, also with respect to the number of stories, which is in keeping with the 2 stories. The project's massing, again, is broken up by the recessed building forms and geometric volumes. For example, the break between the 2 buildings, again, minimizes massing by creating 2 separate building forms. And in addition, additional recessed building forms and geometric volumes are repeated throughout the building. Again, in a way of articulating the building facades and just eliminating that homogeneous, continuous vertical, or in this case, horizontal look. The project's rhythm and variety of massing configuration appears to be predominantly, or a predominant aspect of the design, given the varying roof lines, the focus on geometric volumes, and the staggered step backs. Overall, the project is well articulated in massing by using various techniques, again, using such as the rhythm and the variety of form, height differences in the roof lines, and the use of colors which accentuate the building elements. As far as design and detailing is concerned, the surrounding neighborhood is comprised, as I alluded to earlier, of a mixture of architectural styles, which again include more of a boxy and 2- and 3-story multifamily developments with wider frontages. And again, this proposal features more of a streamlined contemporary design that includes an emphasis on rectangular shapes, voids, clean lines, modern finishes, staggered roof lines, and transparent elements. Some of the features include, as far as transparency, for example, would be like the large, these types of large windows on these particular elements with the multi-grid patterns and the small squares. Other architectural detailing can be seen in the treatment by the heightened parapet walls, different window designs, and the horizontal painted sheet metal fascia, and scored lines on the facades with a 1/2-inch metal reglet at the reveals, and that would be these little areas in here. As far as materials and colors, the contemporary project features a combination of smooth and stucco walls painted different colors, which offset with at offset intervals, or staggered building planes. The fenestration again consists of aluminum windows with different sizes. Most of them are actually sliding, or in this case operable, and also with the exception of a few which are fixed windows. Lastly, the recommendation that staff has is that although the contemporary style of the project may be unique as it relates to the color and layout compared to the surrounding multifamily buildings, the project's articulation and undulating building planes and the overall mass and scale help it blend with the neighborhood context. Some conditions or considerations that staff included in the report, there were actually 5, and that would be to add additional, or in this case, add landscape in the clear space in front of the mechanical equipment facing the street. And I'll point that out for reference. I know that I understand that the applicant mentioned to me that they require that clear space for the FDC equipment, which is that fire, I believe, backflow preventer. Not too sure on the exact language, however. They can propose some lawn. So that if they actually need the clear space, that's fine. We're not requesting bushes, but at least some lawn in order to have some landscaping on the front, because that's actually a requirement per code. The other item is to enhance the front entry door to the units by painting the door with an iron ore paint color to match the canopies. Upon reviewing the project, actually I couldn't really, well, these are the doors to the main units, and that's why staff is recommending somewhat of a different color to accentuate, or actually to stand out the front entry, because I wasn't quite sure when I was reviewing it if that was actually a back door or the front door. So that's just a consideration that the staff had. Use aluminum windows with clear anodized frame, which obviously is consistent with this contemporary style.
What are they using?
I believe they were just using, let me see, vinyl. Oh, no, sorry, aluminum. And they don't actually have specific details regarding that. That's why staff recommended
What color was it?
specifically.
Aluminum.
It just said aluminum, so they didn't specify color. I'll let the applicant who's in the audience address that, but that's why staff actually made that recommendation, to be a little bit more specific in terms of what type or what specific aluminum window they should use for this type of style, or this style of the building. The next condition or comment was to integrate the garage exit stairs located at the front of the building by using a clear glass railing to match the balcony. In addition, introduce sufficient landscaping in front of the staircase railing in order to screen from public view. Specifically, that particular condition refers to these stairs right up front, which are facing Louise Street.
And the west elevation?
Right, it would be the west elevation. This is the railing right here, and staff thought perhaps introducing, again, a type of railing that is more consistent with this particular style. Again, that's why the glass railing was something to consider, which again is more in keeping with the transparency that the building's actually showing throughout. And the last comment was that there are some discrepancies between the cross-section view and elevation drawing. The elevation drawing reflects the design approved by the board. I actually have the cross-section views, and they're actually in your packets, but I did not pin it up. If you'd like me to do so, I will. But that's why staff wanted to be specific that this was actually more of what we wanted, or that we wanted to present to the board, which is actually something that we reviewed and is more in keeping with the overall design concept compared to the section views. But again, I'll have the applicant address that. Perhaps they already have.
It seems like the second view issue was a finish grade, adjacent finish grade. Was that the issue?
Actually,
like that was
some
different
of the items that we had noted, and I can take those plans out, was like there wasn't. It didn't seem like they have, for example, I'm just giving you one random example, like the eaves that just kind of ended there, and there were no details. So if I recall, that was one of them. Minor, but still, it's something important and something that's all part of the whole design concept. Because if the section drawing is not consistent with the elevation plans, we'll have issues down the road.
I'd actually like you to, because I think for me it was a finish grade issue. It looked like they had the finish grade.
You're probably
considerably
right as
different,
well. I
so.
just don't have every single item that I pointed out that was or that there was a discrepancy with.
Do you know the height of that freeway wall
I don't.
in relation to the
I don't.
section or elevation?
The requirement is to provide a property line wall. Having that freeway wall, do they still need to have another wall next to that?
Well, the way the code reads, it's for each individual project. So they would have to provide their own wall. The screen wall is something separate. Yeah. That again, that belongs to, I believe, to
And can that
Caltrans.
wall be anything other than CMU wall? And does it
Yeah,
have-
if I recall, there's no specific regulation as to the material.
Okay.
It's just, if the way the code reads, it's just specifically the actual height.
Okay, because on the south property line,
Actually,
you got about a 7 to 8 foot retaining wall there. Now, they're showing that they're putting another 6 foot wall on top of that. I'm just wondering,
The combined,
the combined is not...
there is a restriction with the combined. I believe it's 6 feet, but I'll have to double
But you
check.
already have an 8 foot wall there.
But that belongs to the neighboring
Right,
property, I believe, to the south.
right. So
ag-
by putting the new wall in, it does not add on to the...
Well, if it's not on top of it, no, it would be separate.
So separate, so you can put a 6 foot wall separate from their wall and...
And also, it's also a wall, in addition to we have also the requirement regarding the garage, on top of the garage.
That's the detail.
Yeah,
They're okay with that.
so far, but I'll have to further look into it during plan check. I didn't really, honestly, I didn't really get into the specific zoning requirements on that specific
Because
issue.
from the garage, they already have an 8-foot, they're gonna have another 6-foot, they're gonna have like almost a 14-foot wall.
If that's the case, then no, they can't do that.
I'm just, so in order for them to get their security and the boundaries, does it have to be a ceiling? Can it be something more transparent?
Well, again, the way the code reads, it doesn't specify that the material in this particular case for walls in the multifamily zone. There's more specific criteria regarding the overall height. Specifically those walls above the garage. There's a section in there, I'd have to get my
They're
codes
obviously
and I can
putting
go
it on
over.
top of their garage, but I'm just wondering, how does that work with the wall or north side, like, freeway wall that you gotta...
I think the section notes that as a 6-foot-high fence.
Right. And that's what but the fence is a block wall, so I'm just wondering,
Is wrong.
even though that it's 6 foot, I'm just wondering, as part of,
This drop, that's what I was saying.
part of the requirements of, does it have to be a solid wall versus can it be a more
Yeah, it should be
transparent, maybe
My
lighter?
understanding, it has to be more of a solid wall because the whole purpose is to provide screening from the abutting resident, in this case, the abutting
Sorry.
residential zones
No, it's deep.
or residential properties.
Okay,
Mr. Foy is checking the code right now, so we'll have an answer for you.
all right. Meanwhile, we have two cards for the two applicants, so
They have-
which, there needs to be one applicant, so...
You have that, and then...
So Marco, you're up.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, for the record, my name is Marco Brambilla. My address is 109 East Harvard. The first comment I have is probably I feel almost guilty of causing you to come here for the one and only DRB case today. But hopefully the study session later will, attune our culpability on that. And I would like to thank the staff for the report, for their comments. And in fact, hopefully this was the result of an extensive cooperation and extensive dialogue with the staff before we submitted the project. So we tried really to approach this project from a slightly different approach and do something that we had discussed in the past. What do you do if you have these lots and can you break it in the middle of it and do something with that? And someone in the back is smiling because we have gone through this in the past. And, this is the first project we're presenting on that, and given the particular location, the freeway, the narrow width, et cetera, we actually, thought that, a more contemporary design and really breaking up the masses and the scales and sort of playing with that would be probably the right architectural approach. In the process, the FAR and the lot coverage and the height, were actually all of them are less than allowed, and some of them substantially so. In the actual implementation of the project, we really tried to pick up some of the better quality materials and finishes that we felt that probably will be appropriate here. There are some comments and conditions that staff made, and we substantially agree. Yes, we have changed the windows to aluminum as already, it was mentioned as one of the conditions, and all of the other conditions, if they're allowed by the code, we're happy to comply with. One caveat on my end, right after this presentation, for family reason, I need to be in a hospital, but my partner is here, and that's why, Mr. Malikan, you have two cards. So that for the record, they will be at your disposal. So any questions, any comments, regarding code, et cetera, Mr. Nazarian will be able to answer that. In short, one of the major features of the project is actually, although this is a relatively small project, to do what we had discussed, many times in the past, can you do a project where the common area is actually in the middle of it, sort of play with that, and still be compatible, still be a marketable project, still be a project that you could, sort of build and convince, your client, your contractor, your market, whatever that may be, that is still feasible and doable, and it's pleasant, to do so in the massing of the project. And that's basically what is in front of you. we certainly try to give a character by, creating the second story is further, setbacks, so you're creating more of a setbacks and undulation and recesses, an overall of the project. And hopefully that is, what the intention of the project was. So, the rest of it, I'll be at your disposal for the time that I'm here, and if you have any further questions, Mr. Nazarian will be at your disposal. We do not have any objections to some of the comments that were, conditions that were proposed. Some of them are governed by design, some of them are governed by code, and whichever they are, we'll be happy to do.
Okay.
Thank you so much. If you have any
I think-
questions, I'm still here for you.
Well, I think we're going to direct most of the questions because I have quite a bit of
No problem.
detail and
Appreciate
questions. So we'll just go. I'm sure
No
Mr.
problem.
Nazarian can handle. Do you have any other specific? Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Okay. So Mr. Nazarian, if you can just transfer the balance of the time to Mr. Nazarian. Yeah. So I guess we can just ask you the questions, and if, I do have some questions, but my colleagues can go in and...
I have a couple.
Yeah.
Other than the painted fascia that's at the top, everything else is stucco?
Yes.
Okay, so there are no other materials?
No, stucco with the different finishes and the different colors in some areas with the metal reglets on it to give some, distinct, different design and look to the building, yes.
Okay. Mr. Jean-Pierre, do you have any questions?
I have one question. The bridge. What's the reason behind the bridge?
And that the reason of the bridge that I'm providing the common outdoor space on the top of the deck. But again, as Milka mentioned, I have a sound wall next to the freeway, and I thought it's a nice design element to separate, to give an additional open space on the top of let's say on the second floor level, to have more open again, let's say with the view open space on the second floor. And it's because I have a sound wall next to the freeway, and the common outdoor space, it's maybe 6-7 feet below of the top of the wall. Again, on the second floor where I do have that bridge, if you check the plans, I have a spiral stairs giving access to the top of the bridge to, again, as a common outdoor space.
So you'll be able to see over the sound wall when you're at that height.
It's pretty high.
It's about 8 feet.
This one.
It will be 8 feet from our finished deck.
They're a couple feet up from finished grade.
Oh, I see. So you...
Because our top of the deck is 3 feet above the curb level.
So it's about 11 foot tall.
11 foot, it's 3 feet. We are 3 feet above the curb. Then it's about 8 feet wall. It's remaining.
So you're saying if I'm standing on that balcony, I will see the mountains?
Yes.
Basically, the sound wall is the floor of the bridge.
Yes.
All right.
You are talking, it's the fire department connection, and it's a fire department requirement. I'm calling clearance.
Okay, so this is no trace. Okay, so you can go ahead and do maybe even grasscrete or, okay. My next question, you've been using these checkered windows similar to a glass block or whatever.
What are they? It's not specified anywhere on the plans.
And it's just fixed panel windows with the grids.
Okay.
Because I thought to use the glass block, but it will be, I didn't find appropriate to
That's
use
fine.
glass block.
Now, my other question is, you're specifying aluminum windows. Do you have any brand or any
Not
manufacturer?
really, I didn't thought, but I saw the comments of the staff, anodized, the bronze color.
So we can go ahead and give you the
Yes,
what
of course.
what company to,
Yes.
okay.
And
And then, yeah, obviously, we don't have a perspective, which in the past, my take has been that if the packet it's not complete, we do not review it because it's not fair to other people that go through the process and they go through the requirements and they provide us with all the requirements. So in the past, we have continued it, but in this, the renderings are drawn fairly consistent, and I'm able to kind of read what three-dimensionally, but I'm not sure if my colleagues are, so I don't know if...
What I think happened, Board Member Malikian, was that originally, when this application was taken in, and we did have a rendering perspective, however...
So the changes have been
There
made?
have been changes.
Okay.
I have notes that say
Okay.
old plans.
That's fine.
And I think
mean-
perhaps
I mean,
that was
that-
something
that's
that
fine.
staff missed
That's fine.
during the transcourse of the time.
My question, I think it's my last question. I don't have a tendency to write down questions. It just comes up. What was the thought process putting the driveway on the south side, being that you're putting it right next to approximately 4 foot away from another driveway that is going to be coming up from?
And the main thought was the south side of the property is lower than the north side. So by having the driveway on the south side of the property, I approach to the garage level that I have to go, I reach easier and faster. And the slope of the ramp and the length of the ramp, it will be less than if I put in the north side.
And then any reason why you went with very expensive railings and other types on the back of the building where pretty much no one's going to be able to see it, and then you use wrought iron, more of a off-the-shelf kind of a wrought iron railing fencing in the front of the building?
In the front of the building that you are mentioning, it's the railing in the next to the stairs going down into the
The
garage.
gate, the front gate, the stairs, all of that.
Because the building itself, it's a contemporary design, just looking to the building, okay?
Right.
I see that way, the gate, it's separated from the building because, and I didn't find appropriate to go with the glass door in the main entry door to the building. But as you see, mostly the glass railings, it's on the second floor to give more transparency to the building, and that was the thought.
But they are frosted, so it's not transparent. So, anyways,
Yeah.
well, okay.
And the railing, just maybe if I can add the comment regarding the railing in the front of the stairways going leading into the garage, because that is it's on the ground level. It's the ground level. I don't see appropriate to have a glass there, and mostly that it will be covered by the bushes and the landscaping.
Okay.
But if you insist, I can change it to that.
Well, we'll go through the plans and we'll give you some ideas and thoughts. Okay, thank you very much. Is this?
Karan Azari.
No. Is there? Oh, you okay? Aram Kazazian. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Aram Kazajian. I'm not associated with the project. I'm here for something else, but I'm just listening. I have a couple of comments for you. Looking at the plan itself, I think it's a nice design. I'd say it will be an asset for that area. I know the area very well. That's one thing I would like to say. Also, regarding the comment you made for the side property line wall, That's always been a bug on my side. I think if you have a 6-foot wall, and then you put another 6-foot wall, it's like a 12-foot right on the property line. If it does have a decorative type and open design, it would be more appropriate. Also, if you have an existing wall already on the side, from one side of the building, 3-story building, the other side is the freeway, I don't think you need to have a 6-foot wall for a barrier. At that point in time, a 3-foot railing or 4-foot railing, 42-inch railing will suffice as a guideline for the building area. But I don't know why we need another 6-foot wall. You might consider to cut that down. I also listening regarding the second floor deck they have in the middle of the property towards the back. I can read the idea out of that because what it is, he's correct. His common area is sitting down into the ground with the walls on both sides. What he's done is lifted the floor up higher to get visibility over the freeway wall to get into the hills. And the other side, you don't have much going on, so you can see right through the hillsides. Those are the comments I have, and also the comment you made, Mr. Chairman, regarding the railing. If there's something more appropriate in the front, would look nicer to a heavier material instead of a 1x2 material. It looks kind of weak. It doesn't look very nice here. Those are the comments, but I just wanted to give you my opinion.
Appreciate
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. If you don't have any more questions or anything, then I'll just close the public session.
I have a comment regarding the wall, specifically in the zoning code. In review, on reviewing this particular section in 30.12, let me look at the exact number. 30.11.070, Section 3. It talks about, letter H, semi-subterranean parking garages shall have, and it discusses the interior setback situation, or what the requirements are. But specifically, if you continue reading on, it says that project complete, provided that the combined height of the garage and any solid wall or fence on top of the garage in the setback area does not exceed 6.5 feet above the adjacent ground level, and the garage is located immediately adjacent to the interior property line. Again, this is if they're not more than 3 feet above grade, which they are not. So that's that
Yeah, but
particular section that discusses that.
That doesn't help us in this situation. You got an 8-foot wall, and you're putting this wall in. You need to have it for security, and you're going to end up having a 14-foot high wall that the adjacent neighbors are going to be looking at. And so, I mean,
Doesn't make sense.
I think definitely somebody needs to go back and look at that and figure out a solution for this. Because you need to have a security wall. I mean, building safety governs in this situation, I think. But
Well, it wouldn't have to be the length of the driveway, though.
no, but the entire length, I mean, people are walking all the way to the back. You need to have a path of travel around the building, and you can't have an 8-foot drop from one property to the other. And obviously we're going to be meeting by putting the 6-foot wall of the requirements for this building, but then what happens to the neighbor? And no one's here to speak for this. I'm just, so I don't know what happens.
If we had the ability to say that it could be wrought iron or something, if that's an option.
Would that help the situation? I mean, even if it's a wrought iron, you're still going to have to measure for the wrought iron.
I mean, at least it's open. It would be transparent at that point.
You're specifically, though, now concerned about the boundary line wall, correct?
Yeah.
There is no specific, at least I couldn't find any specific criteria in the code that discusses the requirement of actually having a boundary line wall mandatory, because in this case, it's not commercial budding residential, which it is. I mean, if that were the case, it would be a requirement.
Okay.
So in that case, I don't see there being a zoning or coming into conflict with the zoning code as it relates to having or proposing railing. Staff can correct me if I'm mistaken, but I don't foresee that being
Need to
a
have
zoning issue.
a barrier, a guardrail along that area. People, obviously.
Yeah, but it is just a subterranean garage that's that portion, though. I mean, the residences are,
But you got to put a 6-foot wall there. So what do you
right,
do?
but the residence is up high. I mean, they're, nobody really experiences the lower rate.
No, I understand, but based on the way that Milker just read the code, they're going to measure from the adjacent
Yeah.
finished grade, and finished grade is 8 foot below.
Mhm.
So everybody's scratching their head.
A lot of heads to scratch around.
If you would like to be specific about the material of the
No, I'm just saying.
rail, you could be, because if it's the new code says that if it's visible from the public right of way, which it would be in this case, and if it's over 3 feet, then it would be subject to design standards, and then
Okay, so we can go ahead and specify whatever it is, and they would be fine. Okay, all right, that's all right. All right, Mr. Carter, would you like to go first?
Yes, and I'll be brief. When you drive by the property, it's a very constricted lot. So, although I must say the project does have design elements, and I find it an attractive design. But as my chairman and other board members raise important points about that it is such a small lot, and property lines and walls are sort of critical in this. I'm going to listen to our complete discussion about all this because it is such a constricted lot. I think we better be clear on those elements before we push on. But I do think it has design elements and appears to be an attractive project.
JP?
Me?
You, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
It is an attractive project. I like what you've done, the solution with the indentations, but I do have a couple of concerns besides Alan's comments regarding the sheet metal roofing, the angle. I don't know if it's working or not with the design. I'd rather see it maybe more boxy, rectangular, instead of avoiding the angled rooftops. Also, I'm not comfortable with the bridge. I would be more comfortable if it was somewhere that you go up and sit versus standing there and looking. I don't think so anyone going to go up and stand there looking over the view. I agree with Alan, actually, regarding the railing is kind of off the shelf. I would like to see a little bit upgraded in design, maybe introducing horizontal versus vertical ironwork, a little bit more contemporary, that will break down that vertical. It looks like everything is vertical. It needs some kind of horizontal. Because the site is narrow, everything is vertical, so you need some kind of to break it even. I'm not sure about the gridded glass. Those little. Maybe we should investigate into more taking out the grids. Have a clear pan that will open up. I'm not sure about the doors. We need a little bit more info about the entrance doors. I don't know if they're solid wood. It looks like it's part of the building. There's no hinges or anything. So I couldn't even tell that was the entrance doors. Last, the painted the stucco, the Colorado peach, I'm not sure. It's such a narrow site. You have the freeway wall, and then you have an adjacent apartment or condo building. It's a pretty tight. Introducing darker colors, it's going to make it a little bit. I would suggest that to change that color, maybe to a lighter color towards white or white gray color, I don't have problem with the green. Concrete, smooth, it's good. I like it. I like the frosted glass. Though I'm not sure to the back side, I don't know what it does. I mean, doesn't help much. Also in the front, I would like the architect a little bit spend this front over here. The difference, we don't have the 3D, so kind of it's too much. We don't know what's happening. Maybe this should be, is it on the same plane? Maybe keep the same color, the concrete. It will be much simpler. Landscaping, I would like to know what the applicant is introducing as far as landscaping along that freeway wall. Is the people going to look over that wall? Is there any thought behind that wall? What are you introducing as far as landscaping or other elements? That's about it.
Thank you. Welcome,
Yeah.
Mrs. Zarifian.
I think it's a very nice design. I'm very happy with the massing of it. I think it's really very well done for those reasons that he mentioned, that it's trying to find a different way of adding the public space in an area that would be more successful. So I think that was very, very well done. A couple little things, and then maybe one bigger thing. I do agree that the wrought iron on the front, it really needs to be worked on. I think you could probably do something in iron, but it should be done in a contemporary fashion. I mean, if you look at the way you did the security doors, that's right out of Home Depot. I mean, it's unfortunate because it's on the front of the building. You could do something in steel, whether it was steel panels or something like that, that would be in keeping. I think that'd be very, you've shown a facility, so I'm sure you could do that. One thing that struck me, though, when I was looking at it, and I wasn't sure what the materials were originally, because the color strikes me as much more as something that you would see in a commercial zone, and not so much in a residential zone. In that, especially in that area, which is sort of beige to the extreme in that neighborhood. But what I was sort of hoping that those colors were changes of material, because I really do think that building would be so spectacular if those areas that are brown were some kind of wood and some other type in a material or done in a way that would add a warmth to it. Because I think to do that bold a color where everything is stucco, I think it's kind of unfortunate, because as marginally unattractive as those other buildings are around you, they actually have done natural material on them. So I don't think there's anything, far-sighted, objectionable about that. So I really would like to see some materials added to it, because one thing that's nice about that design is that you've defined areas and masses, and those could be really emphasized nicely with material. And I think the level of appreciation of that building would go up considerably, I think. If there was the areas where there were concrete, you could do that still. But if you had areas where there was, more of a contemporary version of a brick and then some wood elements to it, you could still have some stucco, but it would be, in balance to the other. And I think that's the only part that really, it kind of loses it for me. That diminishes what is a very nicely done building. I would just, like I said, just try to incorporate more of that into the design.
Very good point. Very good point. Mrs. Zarifian, you just joined us. Do you have any comments? I'm sure you reviewed the plans.
I think in a very narrow site, the planning is quite wonderful. It's I think overall the design of the building looks very nice. I totally agree with the change of materials, kind of connecting to the change of colors. That will only make it a better building, because we see around the city a lot of examples of buildings that try to do everything with stucco and they change colors or mainly colors, and it just doesn't do the job. Change of material is something that can just make the building richer in its composition. The other thing, I think in reference to some of the comments made by the staff, or the staff comments, I think there was a comment with regard to changing the handrails at the ground level to glass, same as the other ones, which I sort of disagree, because the ones closer to the ground, they're more vulnerable. They want to be stronger as guardrails. So I wouldn't recommend glass at that level. I can see that because of sprinkler systems going on and off on daily basis, there are so many things that can really make those very hard to maintain and can potentially be very harmed by many different things. So I think there's a nice change of what happens at the ground level and how glass belongs to the upper kind of platforms of the building. The other, sorry, I'm just trying to catch my breath. I was running. The entry doors, I don't know, with the exception of the color that was mentioned to be the same as the awnings. I think there is a nice horizontal sort of coloration that creates the vertical surfaces to be one thing and the horizontal awnings to be another element. I don't think necessarily they should be the same color. If they become the same color, it might take something away from those strong lines that make up the horizontal awnings and or shading edges. So I don't have a problem with the doors being a different color, but I think, again, in reference to Mr. Girago's comments, the change of material will help it a lot. And I noticed that some of the awnings at the ground floor on the north elevation, it seems like they have some hangers. If I'm not wrong, there are two windows. I would try to make them cantilever and not have this extra difference in the way the awnings are done, so that and it being the same color. They are the same color, right?
Green and red.
Oh, I'm partially colorblind, so I didn't see that. But I think it would be nice if there's one type of awning rather than some hung and some not. But I think that's generally what I have to say. The front, I wasn't sure in terms of the comment in reference to the landscaping. I'm more landscaping.
There's a backflow preventer on the fire.
Yeah, which part?
It's right in front of the stairs.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, so that's probably a good thing. That's all I have. Yeah.
Well, I really like the project. I think it's a very nicely done project. I think you always have some challenges when you step into the more of a modern or contemporary design. And one of the most important parts of making a contemporary project work, being that it is a very simple architecture, I think the details play a huge role in making the building work to the benefit of the design that you're trying to achieve. I definitely agree with the materials. I think the simply using stucco and using color variations, I don't think it really helps you. I think you've created these variations, not seeing your perspective, looking at the plans. You created these variations that these walls die into certain, they don't continue in simple surface. So I think you definitely have the boundaries to create materials out of these colored highlights that you've created. I somewhat agree with Mr. Buladian about the walkway. It is, I understand the reasoning that because we're facing a solid wall, and you wanted to create a higher platform so people can go visit, but unfortunately that platform leads directly into the bedrooms of the third unit. So by creating that platform, that public space that is right next to the bedrooms of the second floor and just the walkway, I really don't think that's helping the situation. I think it would be in your benefit, and I don't know if it's even possible, to be able to create that higher hierarchy or that common space that you're trying to achieve, if it's possible to even access the rooftops and create a roof deck, or even add some greenery on top of it, or something to both act as a insulation and at the same time be as a viewing platform over the wall and looking up towards the mountains. And I think the glass railings that you're using, you can take that and kind of use it at certain other areas. I agree by using the glass railings that you've used in the back. If it's used in the front, especially the lower railing that you have, the walkways that are coming up from the parking, it's right next to the landscape, so it's not really going to help the situation. So I think by introducing the materials, maybe at that wall that is coming up, the retaining wall for the stairs, maybe that can be maybe even a pour-in-place concrete that has some planting in front of it, or even fountain in front of it, or something to house your signage for the address, or something that brings that more of a modern effect there. I really would encourage the wrought iron railing to be, the gates to be replaced with frosted glass. I think that would definitely help the overall look that you're looking for. The other thing is that when you're creating these flat roof, the same articulation, same variations that you've created on the elevation, I think it can definitely work to your benefit and start playing with the roof. There are areas there that you can actually lower. And for example, where you have the circular staircase, the storage, and the walk-in closet, that area, that right there, I really don't see why that section needs to go all the way up to the same height as the parapet. That section can be lowered, the canopy can continue out, and similar details can occur along the front or other areas that I think it would give a little bit more interest vertically versus horizontally that you've created. I've never been fond of faking materials and painting materials to achieve certain look. If you're using metal, I like to see it as a metal, clear anodized or something like that. What the sheet metal roof that it's been shown as painted, all I think it's going to do is create maintenance issues. So I wouldn't really mind just to see that as a clear anodized metal roof and just be an accent piece, and let that be it. And if you follow Mr. Baladian's suggestion to straighten that out, that's one way. But if you do decide, depending on what the decision we make, I think that being painted orange, I think eventually it's going to fade, it's going to become a maintenance, it's going to peel off. So I'd rather see it as a natural material and maintain, from the beginning we're going to see it to the end. I think one of the elements there that you definitely, it's hurting your overall design, that checkered glass element there. I would look into, I know there are certain areas that you have ground level and the top level and you have a walkway there. Maybe there are areas that you can kind of cut back the walkway back and maybe create a railing on the top or something that you can let the glass go all the way from top to bottom. And then there are materials out there such as like glass channels that it would give you the horizontal look. It is frosted, so you have the obstruction or the visibility is obstructed by using that, and it gives you the horizontal, the vertical look that you're looking for, rather than going with a very traditional 80s, very, I don't want to say cheap, but a very non-characteristic look for that area. I mean, I'll even go to just remove the grids and just leave it as a plain glass. But I think there's definitely opportunities to carry this lot further. As far as the windows, I would go Fleetwood or similar. As far as type of windows, Fleetwood or similar. Gelwin has windows that I think it's up to par with that. But Fleetwood will give you the look that you're looking for. It is a nail-on system. It does give you a nice profile of aluminum profile, and so you will be able to get the look that you're looking for. And other than that, I think that's it. One last thing. If you can, and this is something that I think you need to work with your landscape architect, I think the project, it's bounded by this giant wall, north wall, and this apartment building on the south. So basically, there is no incentive to work hard, get home, relax, open your windows, look at a wall. So to minimize this, I think you may be able to come up with some alternative solutions to hide and camouflage this wall, such as I've done in the past in some of the projects that what we've done is we've placed these steel posts at every 4 or 6 feet, and it comes up, it creates these basically every 6 feet, and you can run cables within them. And proper planting, you can have growing vines or something there, and that would hide that. And within that, you can start putting some elements there, such as you can put lighting, you can even put some fountains, kind of a white noise to alleviate the noise effects of the freeway, and other stuff that going with more of a modern look that you're looking for, and not the traditional, the fountain that is shown on the plans right now. So I think there's definitely ways. I would be completely open and would encourage for you to remove that walkway and the money that you've allocated for that, spend it on the wall and find a way to get onto the rooftop and use it as a roof deck. So that's. I'm just talking to you. I'm just telling you. So you don't. There are no major issues there. And the last thing is the railing, obviously on the south side. I think I would go with more of a transparent than a solid wall. I think it's a lot more friendly gesture to the neighbors to your south. And even if you can set that back a foot or so, maybe you can plant in front of that, and that can grow into covering that, and maybe even spill over to the bottom. But these are my comments.
Chairman Malikian, if I may.
Are you covering that?
No. That was a lot.
Okay, sorry.
Chairman Malikian, let me ask my chairman and fellow board members. We'll have to fashion somehow this into a motion, and I guess these are really conditions. I would say to the applicant, the very nice renderings, one of our board members does bring up a point that a change in materials would, in fact, give you the effect that your renderings have presented to us. But now let me ask these board members, as we look, for instance, at the south elevation, if we picked one of those pieces to be a change in material, given the fact that really, as you look at the project, you're really just looking at you're going to see the west elevation. It's sort of snugged in between these other big projects. Which would you like to attempt to do a change in material in?
I think the orange.
Oh, the orange.
You replace it with, well, pretty much all the orange pieces. If you replace it with
wood
plank, wood
yeah.
siding, horizontal wood siding, maybe.
The lighter
Yeah.
color.
The lighter color, or stain it to any color. I think I think it would give you the look that you're looking for.
And I would point out that is, of all of the three surfaces there, that's the smallest square footage. So I think you've picked a modest one,
And that,
and it is a highlight element.
Exactly, there are areas that they've used it by the railing, the glass railing, and that wood can carry and become the one of the planks can carry over the glass, and so that becomes, again, it becomes details, and
Okay.
that's the important key here. How to detail properly to make it look right. And it's not just drawing modern buildings; it's how to detail it
Right.
properly.
And I would say to anybody tuning in that that's a little bit consistent with this board. If you remember the project we had that was the retail that was Craftsman, but actually didn't follow through with all of the craftsmen that they could, we asked that project to relook at that and come up with some real craftsman detail. So I think that's probably a consistent view in this project.
Sure, I don't need to.
Maybe for clarification and to have clear idea what I have to do. All the comments I appreciate. The one comment about that bridge, of course that bridge I'm showing, it could be a sitting area. They can go up and sit. But your comment that if I put that on the top of, on the rooftop, that is not working.
I'm not saying put the bridge on the top. I'm saying
the
put
common
access.
area. The common area.
I mean, all it needs is that every unit will have their own staircase, or I don't know if it's possible. I'm not sure. I don't know if the code allows
I
that.
wanted to mention that the bridge could be a sitting area. We can put benches and to sit.
But you have to remember into consideration you're going to have kids there, and you have 2 bedrooms on each end, I believe.
And I don't have any opening.
I know if somebody's sleeping on each end during the day, and we have kids going up and down, like my boys will do, nonstop, those poor guys, they're going to be screaming. And there's no, functionally, in my opinion, I don't see the reason of that beside the view as a functionally. I mean, it doesn't do anything. I mean, it's, in my opinion, I don't know how my colleagues feel. I think it's overkill. It's going to be a problem for that development.
Thank you. Okay, well, we need a motion. We need to.
Yes, let me just before I do the motion, because I'm comfortable now entering a motion with a condition for the change of materials when I hear my colleagues and myself. The square area that we're talking about, I think it's substantial and yet it's doable. The other elements, do we have further conditions, or are these considerations? What would be our
condition? There would be a condition about the front gates, the front
Okay.
wrought iron, and I think maybe the railing that would go along the south property line. That it be
I think the windows, Fleetwood windows, or
The color.
the color
clear
of
anodized.
the clear anodized,
How about
and that's
the-
a condition. I
How about the
think.
glazing? Are we going to tint or are we getting a tint? Can we dictate that for the
Well,
glazing?
if I may, can we start from the beginning? Again, because I have several items.
Okay,
So
let's do
which
that.
specific condition would you like to have in your motion, Board Member?
I would move approval of this project with the condition, and this just being one, that the materials, there be a change in materials. We'll call it the painted metal, the orange sections, for want of a better.
And are you referring to the orange or peachy color facade sections? Or is it the metal sheet fascia?
It's the...
It's everything other than the face.
I guess, yeah, I guess it's stucco. We're talking
It's
about
the
it.
Colorado peach on the facade.
To be
Right.
replaced with...
With wood is what I
Yes.
heard earlier. So, and that would be every single area throughout the building that has that specific color.
Right.
That
Yes.
would be the area that will.
Yes.
Doesn't mean that it needs to be painted peach. Again, it needs to be stained in a wood.
And a color combination that works with that as an element.
Okay, and we heard specifically wood siding mentioned,
Yes.
horizontal wood siding. Would there also be an option for a wood panel like a fin ply as well as an option, so that the architect could look at their choices and have some flexibility?
What is
Fin ply?
Fin ply?
Fin ply is like a plywood made for exterior use.
Oh, I see.
That's a
Pre-finished one, pre-finished. He's got-
yeah, it's pre-finished.
I think
That's a trade name. There are other products.
Anything other than a stucco. Let's put it this way.
Well, that's a little more flexible than is really useful. But perhaps if we could say some wood material, whether it be a panel or a siding,
Teak, cedar.
and that would only be at the portions that are shown in the orange color that's stucco. So just to clarify, we're not talking about the areas that show up as green on the colored
Right.
elevations
No, right.
or gray. Those can remain stucco.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a comment with that reference to the orange becoming siding. When I look at the building, it seems like, especially if you look at the east elevation, it seems like the concept always is that there's a base and there's a top sort of piece that is sitting on that base. And to me, it seems like the green has a better chance of becoming a different material and be substantial.
Could you see it
enough.
as the mass is running
Yeah,
through?
so that
Okay.
this kind of well-crafted piece is sitting on top of a base. That to me
And then it's a
might have-
horizontal element.
And it's a horizontal element,
Yeah.
and it's substantial enough to make a statement rather than the orange just becoming a bit, because the orange seems like is not big enough to become anything substantial. That's
It doesn't lend itself
and
to
I make
value.
this comment now because I couldn't exactly say which one is orange.
No.
Sorry, that's my problem. But
So
We'll give you a
does
color
that
by number
mean that you would like to see
Are
that?
we okay with the orange or the peach color?
no, I mean the color still is a different issue. I think maybe.
So I think I understand. So
Oh,
we
you mean-
picked an element to change, and you think that
I thought that the top band.
the green would be a better element to change
Yeah,
than the.
I think if it's a material that starts to make a larger statement for the whole complex, it needs to be more than the orange only.
So you're saying replace the peach color to green and then introduce...
No.
The
area
green
that's
on
green
top
above the fascia,
and become-
that would be what.
We were looking for an element to change a material. This is a material change.
Well, I can see what he's saying.
And so we picked the peach to be a material change. The color palette, may change a little bit considering what they pick. But Member Zarifian notes that the green may be a more substantial and
Yeah, because I think orange kind of marks these special kind of sort of inserted parts in the volumes that are created, and it seems kind of
I don't know.
fine.
It's your.
I mean, even you
motion.
can do this. I mean, if you look at this portion, I mean, this is nice, right? If you look at it this way, and then if you go this way, if let's say you take out and then introduce, let's say, a redwood siding, dark cocoa color, like
Yeah,
you see,
Would you see it in somewhere other than the upper band?
it works.
in terms of
The color and the design.
yeah. So
And then
so-
you need to introduce like a third material. These are like the towers. Those are the staircases.
Yeah, so you marked them.
So-
It's marked as green. So if it changes to a different
The green.
material, it still holds. You're talking color-wise, or
no materials. It's
Material-wise,
the material
It
change.
needs to I mean,
So,
I don't know.
okay,
Either way works.
let's be clear. So the color of the peach, we want it to be changed other than peach.
So, okay, you don't like the peach color,
We-
period.
Yes.
But the material stucco is
Stucco's
is
fine.
acceptable.
The green stucco that is shown right now to be replaced with wood siding, and if a third material is added, we welcome that. But not just added, it needs to be, properly placed.
But are we just talking about the green that is above the fascia? Just
For the
upper
third
section?
material,
For the
Like
third-
a metal?
What is the green you're talking about?
the
as
whole
well?
band,
The band.
the whole
The
thing,
whole
the
band.
top
So,
section of
Okay.
it.
so the whole second floor
The
volume,
whole second floor wall.
Why don't you get rid of that, make it a straight, that angle, and then introduce the metal as a band with a different.
No,
Like similar.
I think we're talking about too many.
Too many.
Well, you do
things.
see that this
Designing
needs,
right now.
that
They're
whole
designing.
element does need to read as one, though, doesn't it? You agree that that needs to read as one?
But what
Those kind
what we're saying is that to make it a substantial statement, I think the top green, and which what it's trying to do right now is to create that darker band at the top.
Right.
Being a stucco, what Alex is saying is that let's go ahead and make that a substantial material rather than having it a
So this condition is these two elements?
Right.
Both those elements?
so we're hearing agreement on the second floor, areas that are shown currently, and I apologize to Board Member Zarifian, that are currently shown as green material, that is conditioned by the board to be what we heard is wood siding. So that would change the color scheme because then the vertical tower elements we heard should be a different color to contrast
exactly,
that.
the orange would not, or the peach would not work well.
Right. So it would be too similar, and they wouldn't call out as separate elements. Would there also be an option, just for the board to consider, to maintain a similar color on that green with, say, a hardy plank siding, and then have wood or stucco on the vertical elements?
I don't know about the green being I'd rather have that painted as, or stained, or have it as a wood.
Okay, so we
That's
just
what I
wanted
would
to,
say.
we just wanted to
I mean,
confirm, because we know later on when we implement,
are you saying
that issue of the flexibility would be questioned.
Are you saying it is a semi-transparent, so you're sensing the wood, or is it the linearity of the wood?
No, it's just siding, whether it's hardyboard or wood. I think hardyboard could be nice too, but
So you don't
it will
necessarily
be a
need to sense
material.
the wood, it's just,
Yeah, it's just this the sense of a change in material will help, and the horizontal lines, and it could be hardyboard. I think hardyboard is a very durable and nice material to use.
Okay, so do we have agreement on that point? That
Right, and I think it's important to note that we came to this change. We agreed originally that the Colorado peach areas, we were looking for a change of material. We thought on first glance that would be an adequate amount of surface area to change material. My colleague pointed out to us that if you really wanted something that actually flowed, the entire second floor, the green area, would actually work a little better, and we have agreed to that.
So there's agreement to that, and there is some flexibility on what to use there and what color to use there. So we also heard that now that the second floor area that's currently shown in green is going to be a different material other than stucco, that the vertical portions, the stair tower portions, if you will, could remain stucco or could be a third material.
Right.
Okay, so we heard that clearly.
And just to make it a little more tedious, we had the other conditions regarding the railings, and that. Do you have those? Did you?
Yes.
Yeah, we're not quite finished.
Right. I just started off with the word rot.
your
And
huff
it
made it
stopped
sound
there.
like you were...
No, but actually there was a comment that was mentioned to replace the wrought iron railings. And there was one comment initially at the beginning to replace it with more of the, instead of having the vertical, to use horizontal railings. However, later down in the conversation, it was noted to replace it with frosted glass. So I'm not sure where the board is, what the board is
It is frosted
inclined.
glass, but I think I was talking about that. I think we all in agreement that the stairs that is leading out from the garage, the railing for that is next to the landscaping, so we want to maintain something more durable, such as I was suggesting maybe even pour in place concrete or something there that can be as a backdrop to some nice landscape, maybe even fountain or something there with some nice lighting, or covered with some river rocks or something there that kind of activates that front yard. But the side gates that are shown as a wrought iron, I think that it should be something similar to the materials, and it would be an introduction to what is to come behind the building, which would be frosted glass.
Treat it in the vocabulary of the building, not as a
vocab-
separate standard wrought iron detail.
And again, we heard a couple of different options stated for that gate. I believe Board Member Gallegos mentioned the possibility of a solid metal panel there. Is there agreement that the frosted glass for those gates on the side entry, that should be a condition?
I mean, I'd be comfortable if we gave them the option of integrating it, as long as it was a modern design that was within the vocabulary of the building. That it was.
Is that for the railing, I'm sorry?
It could be the railing, it could be those security gates. I mean, because I think there would be similarity in how you would use it, the vocabulary would use it.
So would it be appropriate to say to use wrought iron railing details to be harmonious with the building design, or do you want to be specific as to the overall style, that whether it needs to be horizontal or needs to be frosted, or how, is there flexibility, again, for the applicant, or do you want to be specific?
For me, the vocabulary is panels, is how other elements are. So I was just saying, if you did panels of either steel or glass. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
So at the gates, they should be panels of either glass or steel, for example. At the rail in front of the building at that stair, we've heard a couple of different things. We've heard the potential for a horizontal wrought iron railing or a solid. Is there agreement on exactly what that would be conditioned?
Although for horizontal, it becomes a means for people to climb.
That's right. We've heard that.
I think use of the same kind of a glass panel system, maybe in the same module system, maybe in like 3 panels of the same module be stacked on top of each other, becomes the gate, and just
or
two.
And then the rail for the stair should be, does everyone agree that should be, say, the solid poured-in-place concrete coming from the garage, and that it should have some feature, landscape or fountain feature on it?
Anything.
So that there should be some feature on it. It shouldn't just be a blank concrete rail.
We've talked about all the gates. Make sure that the garage roll-up gate is at the same language as what we're talking about.
So the material and construction of the garage roll-up door should be of the same quality, a steel gate.
I'm sure they're using it for air circulation, so it should be something in the same. It should not be something off one of those wrought iron with those circles on the top.
Right. Okay. Should be in the same contemporary language of the building.
What else?
The windows,
I suggested that either a solid glass or use a glass channel.
Channel glass?
So from ground to the top, and pull back the floor over there, so maybe you have, or you can carry the canopy over that.
Yeah,
Is that a consideration?
Is that at the stair?
I definitely feel strongly about these checkered glass. I really.
Would you like block? I mean, would you?
I don't like block per se. I mean, that's something you would see in the 80s.
Yeah.
So either it's
Maybe
solid
a-
glass, maybe even a glass that tilts open or something, or channeled glass or something like that. Something different. I think there's the opportunity there. Might as well.
So then eliminate the multi-grid window design and use a solid or channeled glass.
Right.
All right, that's
So,
Anything else? Any concerns regarding the metal sheet fascia to be more of the natural look and not painted, or is that
Those
just...
are just suggestions.
So it's not something that we need to have in the record
I
of
think now that
decision?
we're talked about the colors and everything, I think that should be consistent with the overall look.
We did hear mention, concern mentioned more than once regarding the deck or elevated walkway. Is that a consideration to, say, eliminate the stair and make that a deck for that unit? Or does the board not feel strongly enough about that?
I think probably it should be a consideration.
Okay, so we'll make that a consideration.
Everybody
the
can have
reason-
sort of a fun.
Yeah, the reason is that I was thinking that actually this kind of one thing that it does is that it makes the combination of these three units to look like a big villa. It's like a big house in one reading. Then these kind of complexes are usually everyone knows where someone's territory starts and stops. So although there are continuous walkways, but it could be controlled. So I think it does something to the overall composition of these three units that is kind of nice. I think if you eliminate it, it just becomes just another almost house behind a larger house.
So not include that as a consideration?
No,
or-
consideration
Okay.
is fine, but not a condition.
And
There's actually one question with that. There's a kitchen window. I forgot about this. There's a kitchen window that looks onto that area. Is that
It really hasn't been thought through. I think it's just been more of...
I'm just saying the kitchen window though below. You think
there's
that should be.
there's a lot of issues with that, but, removing it's not really going to help the situation, but, I think, I like the element there, but...
I think it's an acknowledgement by the board that we understand your attempt, and thought about to get up above the wall and up, of some kind of a view. We offer a consideration that you continue thinking it, but I think that's as far as we take it.
I would treat it as a consideration, not as a.
What was that again, too? Well, Stephanie wrote it down.
Yeah, there's just one more item that we've heard a couple of times. There's one angled roof, and we heard from more than one board member the preference for having that rectangular as all the other forms are, rather than having that different. Would you like that as a consideration, or be silent on that point?
I prefer straight than angled. It'll be more, the language will carry over.
Yeah. Can we offer that as a consideration?
I think the problem with it is it's another material. If there was a material that maybe
Too much.
didn't, I don't know, somehow.
Doesn't matter. So let's, and then the treatment to the north wall. At this, some sort of a treatment, some sort of a posting, something.
Board Member Maliki, I'm
Yeah.
only a little hesitant if we condition it and that we come across zoning issues with a condition that comes into conflict with the zoning code, because the condition, and the way the code reads, it
Saying it attach
discusses
anything to
a
it.
solid wall.
I'm not saying.
And the way to address that would be if you could say, if allowed by zoning, do X.
I think what you might be getting at is that it's a landscape, you want to add landscape.
I
to that
do
north.
want to add
Oh,
something.
you're talking about I'm sorry, the screen
north
wall?
wall.
Right.
Oh, okay, I thought you were talking about the railing on the south side, sorry.
I could actually go with
That's not my
both. I could go with both, because it might be nice if there was additional landscape.
But there's not much room there. There's only 5 foot, but you got a window opening up and looking 5 feet away to a
Concrete
11-foot wall.
Chairman Maliki, are you sort of referring to the treatments like on the Orange Street parking garage where there's there are a
Yes.
grid system and actually I was remarkably how quickly those plants
Right.
grew to substantial
And they can do, if they're
coverage.
creative, they can
Yeah.
definitely hide that wall.
I mean that would be a very nice treatment of that.
Now, would you like to see that as a condition or a consideration?
I think it's a,
Okay, condition to embellish that,
Yes.
that side wall, both side walls with landscaping.
Right.
Yes. Okay.
No, I think that's a good
Okay.
suggestion.
I think that's it. So
I'll second that motion.
we have a second. Roll
Second.
call.
You seconded it?
Who made the motion? Was it
I
Board
made the
Member
motion.
Carter?
The motion.
I need a motion?
Second by Board Member Garagos.
I'm sharing it, I'll share it.
Okay, a motion to approve the project with the
Yes.
conditions. Board Member Carter?
Yes.
Board Member Garagos?
Yes.
Board Member Beladian?
Yes.
Board Member Zarifian?
Yes.
Chairperson Malikian?
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
All right, so,
Thank you.
thank you. So we don't have any board business, and we don't have any cards. Rena, you submitted, this is for the next, okay, all right, because it doesn't say, okay. Then I think we're adjourned, if we have a motion.
Make a motion, we adjourn.
I'll second that.
Okay, so we're adjourned. Now we're going to All right, I think we're on.
Yes. The next item on tonight's agenda is the Design Review Board study session. I would like to turn the meeting over to Hassan Hagani, the Director of Planning.
Thank you, Vilya. And first of all, let me apologize to the members of the public who came here expecting this study session to start at 5, and obviously we had an item that took longer than everybody expected. So we apologize, and thank you very much for your patience. The purpose of this study session and another study session with the other board that will take place on the 9th of July is to really start review the new process, the new design review process that we started rolling out April of last year. As you know, the City Council gave directions to completely overhaul the process and change the process, and we've been implementing it. And along the way, we have made already some changes. And tonight, we're going to go over that. As you know, our main intention is to have a transparent and predictable process that produces better products than what we were getting prior to this process. Staff will be going through certain pieces, and as we go through these different segments, we will be taking your comments, and at the end of the study session, we'll write those down, and then we'll go through the next Design Review Board's study session, and in the end, we'll take a series of recommendations to the City Council with direction and asking for their direction to see if some tweaking, some changes should be introduced. And as we go through the session, we will give you some ideas that we have on what we think could be changed to make the process more smooth and work better. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to clarify, we do have several cards, speakers, and I think it would be a lot more productive if we let the staff do their presentations, we do our comments, and then maybe you'll hear what you are here for, and then I'll open up for you guys to come up and speak out, and whatever you guys want to add to. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to briefly go over an overview of the design review process as it works now, and also remind you and the public of some of the changes that have been implemented in the last year. The way design review works now is that we often have pre-submittal meetings with an applicant who will come in to discuss their design with our urban design staff and with planning staff prior to actual submission of an application. Once an application is submitted, a staff person is assigned, and there is an analysis of design. There is a written report, as you well know, that includes a recommendation. The Design Review Board itself then reviews the application and makes whatever series of decisions you make. After the Design Review Board has reached a decision, and if it's for approval, finally, in some aspect, staff then normally works with the applicants to go over the conditions and to resolve any that have been left for resolution prior to them submitting for building permits. When there are plans and an application for building permit submitted, then staff again checks it for consistency with what the Design Review Board has approved. Once the building permit has been issued and construction has started, staff performs 2 inspections, at least for single family, one at framing, for the framing inspection. The final framing okay by the building department depends upon the staff planner signing off on the framing inspection, and that includes having windows in. And then again, for the final building permit, the finalization of the building permit, planning staff again performs an inspection, checking on final materials and landscaping and hardscape and things like that. That would not normally be done at the time of the framing inspection. To briefly review the ordinance that the City Council adopted a little over a year ago concerning design review process, generally it was to streamline the process. The number of reviews for final, the number of times that a board could review an application for final review was reduced down to 2. And there was, the appeal process was also streamlined. Previously, there had been A combination of the two boards referred to as the Alternative Assessment Panel that heard a review prior to going to City Council. That panel was eliminated from the code altogether, and appeals go straight to the City Council. Another important part was that we presented a draft staff report format to Council for their consideration at the time of this ordinance was reviewed. And this was in response to some concern in the public that the process wasn't transparent enough and that sometimes the board wasn't considering all of the design guidelines. So the format that you see in your staff report comes out of a need to cover all of the design guidelines that are applicable to a project. And of course, there's also a recommendation now where previously there had been none. Some of the reasons that the council wanted to streamline the process is that there was some concern that repeated reviews of the same project by the board with an intransigent applicant would just kind of tend to wear the board down, and they might tend to approve things that they perhaps wouldn't when it was fresh before them. Also, there was some concern that at times there was too much over-designing by the board itself as well. And so all of those things made council want to just have the process go faster. And I think there was overarching of that was just to serve both the applicants and the neighboring residents in a more efficient manner, that they weren't continuously called back to meetings as well. One other change I'd like to cover before we move on to the next section here is the notion of preliminary design review. This is a completely voluntary on the part of the applicants, and in fact has been exercised only rarely. I think we've only had maybe 3 or 4 in the last year. There's a little bit of confusion over the board's choice of actions here, and preliminary design review was never meant, it was meant just as a courtesy for an applicant and the neighbors to get a look at some more conceptual designs. So it was a way for an applicant to get input from the board and from the neighbors too, before moving to the more detailed plans of a final review. It was so when the board hears something and passes the project on for final review, it should not be interpreted as the board approving the project. The board certainly should give any and all comments that you'd like to give, and the comments can be quite negative. The comments can be, don't bring back anything that even looks like this. But the board doesn't really have the power to keep something trapped in an endless loop of preliminary review before allowing someone to go to final. And that's, we probably need to rewrite the language in the code, but that was to more clearly reflect that. But I think it's something which causes, a substantial amount of confusion on the part of the public. So next I will turn this over to Stephanie Reich for a discussion of staff reports and recommendations.
Thank you, Tim. As Tim mentioned, the preliminary design review has been essentially removed as a process that you typically see. You've only had a few of those. We've essentially replaced that with what we sometimes refer to as a pre-application, where we meet with the applicant, preferably before they've put together all the copies and final drawings that they need to come before the board, in order to give to them comments that reflect what we hear from the board, from this board and from board number 1 every Thursday night. We have the benefit of hearing from you every Thursday, and we're able to then reflect those comments back to the applicants as we understand better what the board expects. We can relay that to the applicant, that the board may have concerns about this or that aspect of the design as it relates to the neighborhood, and bridge the gap that may exist between what an applicant might initially bring to staff to come before the board, and there would be that gap between what we originally see, and then we work with the board so that hopefully there's an improved design and a more complete design, complete presentation that comes before you. So that's the intention of those meetings. We typically focus first and primarily on how a project fits into the neighborhood context, and to make certain that the new projects will maintain and even benefit the overall community. And so that our focus is on the fit in the neighborhood rather than, say, making certain that before the project comes to you that a great piece of architecture has been created. Our focus is to try and get an applicant to produce a project that fits well within the neighborhood that the community can be proud of. Comments that we have regularly heard from applicants, particularly in the last several months, is that the level of rigor and detail that the board appears to expect in the development of the drawings and the details. So, for instance, that comes before the board. As you know, what in the entitlement phase, the applicants and architects are not producing full plan check sets for the entitlement phase, and typically the comments that we get is that level of detail is quite different than what other cities expect and different than what the profession actually supports for a submittal of that kind. So we wanted to raise that to your attention and get your feedback on bridging that gap as well.
And if I may add, I've also heard some comments from architects that not just the level of the detail of the drawings, but all of the work involved in a DRB submission, gathering information about neighboring properties, their size, their floor area ratios, for what are some very small projects, really, tends to diminish the number of architects who are willing to take on such projects. And there was just some concern that the lack of competition for projects meant that the homeowners were probably not being best served in terms of both price and quality of design. That's just...
That's because of us?
Some of it's
That's interesting.
And we're not necessarily saying what staff does not have any position in this. We think this is an opportunity to address these issues so that the board and the members of the public hear some of the same complaints or concerns that we hear. This would be the time to address those. And whatever the policy in the end is that you recommend to the City Council is what we will recommend to the City Council.
Should we talk about this now, or should we leave it up to the end?
Yes, please. That we had hoped that this would be an open dialogue and exchange.
I think as far as the submittal requirements, I've seen many projects in many years going back, and there are definitely, I have to say, there are definitely architects that do go beyond what is required for them to present, and it probably reflects on their fees and their staffing and other, and versus other professionals that do not have the capability or the means to provide such an extensive documents. But I think the purpose is not to do a quality, high-end presentation drawings and details and everything. I think to me has always been the relating the message and the detail, the intent of the design of what your intentions are. If, as an architect, you go to the site and you see that you're going to be designing a project that are nestled within a 2-story and 1-story. The site is stepping down and so forth. I would not spend a lot of time preparing floor plans, elevations. Obviously, you need to do that, but most of my effort would be directed towards doing exterior, maybe street elevations, cutting some sections, some going beyond what is required, that is written as far as the minimum requirements. Most probably those people who complain are the people that would probably argue that, I've designed the project based on what the code says. Why am I having problems with this? Well, we're reviewing the design. We're not reviewing the zoning requirements. So the challenge is to take all the codes, building and safety, zoning and everything, and put it together to make it fit within the neighborhood, make it fit within the context of what you're designing. And, if the main goal or the main the idea that you're trying to achieve, let it be a detail that you're using, or let it be the massing, you need to sell that to us. And in order to sell that, you need to go beyond what is required, not just go down the list of what. I would go out a limb and say, maybe the requirement's it's not enough. Maybe you want some people that do come in front of us tell us that, they are proposing a project that is Mediterranean or Spanish or ranch or whatever it is. They may follow with some examples, some example projects that kind of help us understand where they're coming from and try to understand, what these details are all about. And I think, like, for example, going back to the previous project, it didn't have a perspective, but the renderings and the drawings were clear enough that I understood what the intent was. So, it's not really what you're supposed to do, it's how you want to sell the project. And I think that's where it is. So I don't know.
I agree actually with everything that Board Member Malekian talked about, and I think you'll remember that in the past we've talked about the need for the ability to convey an idea and what kind of drawings can help us. And even I think I've mentioned it twice that maybe we should somehow include it as a requirement to show maybe site sections or street elevations and site plans that include adjacent properties. Because I would say in the 2 years that I've been here, I've seen only site plans that have just the property itself, nothing else. And that to me is a big problem. As a plan, nothing else. But I think that should go apply to the elevations, to the site sections, and it's simply about the ability to simply understand the intention. And also, again, reiterating what Board Member or Chairman Malekian talked about, we're here to talk about architecture, and quite often architects start their presentation by talking about how they achieved a certain level of parking and height limits, how they addressed it. If you go back and look at some of those presentations, most of them are about interpretations of code and zoning and a lot of different issues, but less about architecture. So those kind of presentations become more problematic because at the end we like to understand where they're coming from. And I just wrote down a few things which I don't want to make it sound kind of bad for our colleagues who come before us, but these are some of the things that they were kind of pointed out to us back in school when we were presenting. And we take it kind of lightly, but it's very important. And they're very simple things. Adjacent buildings, precedents, that if they come in with showing why they have certain things and prove to us that they have done certain Spanish style and educate us and the public that why this building is doing what it's doing. And 3D massing studies and a lot of even single-person operations, offices, they come in with three-dimensional drawings, and it's really, really important for us to understand something rather than trying to understanding in a very short time that we have.
You know, and the argument comes that, you know, there's not the staffing or the firm is not capable of producing such a quality drawings. There's a lot of programs out there right now that do that. I mean, you can have a one-man office that can produce quality, high-end, you know, plans. You draw the plans and automatically creates your elevation sections, 3D model, 3D renderings, and so forth. So there is no really an excuse for us not to be able to get those information. So if we want to kind of go down the list of items that we need to see, but I think as a designer, as an architect, if you're in front of us, you know, I think you need to go beyond the step and
I think we understand the comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
What's next?
Before we move on, any other comments on the staff reports and presentations that you've been seeing, that feedback that we can learn from?
As a staff report, I think is very thorough. So I really enjoy seeing that. I fully understand what it's all, you know, what I'm going to be reviewing and what it's going to be presented to me. I think as a staff, what I would recommend is making sure that everything that we are getting is consistent with what it's required and what it has been presented to you. And honestly, I think if there are materials that are missing, I truly, on the last project, again, I should have made it a lot bigger deal than letting it go, because it's not fair to the other applicants that they do go through the expense and cost and the time to prepare that package. So as a staff, I think staff needs to be policing that and make sure that everything is there. And maybe that, you know, when we're talking about, I mean, I tend to just talk and throw ideas and everything. A lot of times I don't write down what I'm saying. Things come up. And, you know, again, the last meeting, I think we need a lot more thorough documentation, or maybe even a little computer here and just somebody with the fast fingers and just type away, you know, whatever we're talking about. So I think that would.
Well, that's why we read back to you what.
Yeah.
That's what we are doing back
a lot
here.
of times
And
I
in a
forget what I
second-
said, and hoping that you heard it.
And in a second, we're going to have some discussion on how we come down to your decisions, how we record your decisions, and how we follow through with your decisions. And that's another whole process that begins after the DRB approval often.
Can I say one thing, though? You were saying about the submittal. I don't think it's too much to ask, and I think it comes down to this a lot of times. It's to just have a head sill and cross-section of a window. I don't think that's too much to ask for, and I think it's has a lot to do with the execution in many times, and it's the difference between architectural styles, really, how you treat the window. And if that could just be done on an 8.5 by 11 sheet as part of submittal, would answer so many questions, and I think it could be done in a very simple format that you can almost freehand. And I think it would answer so many basic questions about the structure.
And whoever complained about, tell them to go to Beverly Hills or Santa Monica or South Pasadena or somewhere else and see how they address these. So.
Just before we go to the DRB decision discussion, which Tim is going to do, so I think in a nutshell, what we're hearing, the message is that what you think is being asked of the applicants is not too much. It's reasonable and it's expected for those who have been involved in the design professional, and that's part of the practice. And notwithstanding whatever else they're expected to do in other cities, this is what it takes. And perhaps we could even add a few requirements if necessary. And we understand that, and we just wanted to make sure that it's well articulated so that when we go back to the applicants and require them and we get through this interaction, we can again say with some level of certainty this is what the message is, and that staff is carrying on the message of the Design Review Board. And I must add that, as Stephanie was saying, part of our job with the applicants is to gauge what the community and the DRB expect and see where the applicant is, and then help to bring them closer to where the DRB and the community expect. And that takes we've been through quite a journey by the time they come before you. Some applicants a longer journey and a more arduous journey, and some applicants a shorter and more smooth journey. But I think over the last years, a lot of the applicants who perhaps resisted at the beginning, because we are very upfront, we tell them this will be the staff's recommendation if you want to present this design, and if you want a more favorable recommendation, this is what it takes. That goes some back and forth, and I think many applicants have come a lot closer to understanding that that's just a necessity. It's not because staff is mean or bad or staff has something personally against them. So that takes us to the decision.
Well, I think one more thing I want to just add, and then an example. I think it's not just us looking at it and understanding. I think it becomes a public record, and I think the community or whoever's interested, a neighbor that has no clue about understanding what three-dimensionally, reading the plans, the information that it's placed in, I think it becomes a tool for everybody to understand what we're going to be reviewing, such as we've gotten projects that, and this could be a requirement, that I'm not as expert as a landscape architect would be to understand by reading, just simply reading a tree species and what they look like, what they're as mature trees. There are a lot of architects and a lot of packages that we receive that with the names we have the images attached right next to them, so I can start relating to what I'm approving, and sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't. So that's just one simple example of many of the other details that can help the situation.
May I say one thing? In some cases that the staff, and I'm sure you'll remember some of them, that you have given a certain direction, for example, and then the applicant has come before us and we have given the exact opposite direction. What can be done to align those kind of situations?
Right on the topic.
You're right. That's a beautiful segue. Thank you. The next topic is DRB decisions and staff recommendations. Well, as you know, we've only been making recommendations for about the past year. And also the perspective of the boards and the perspective of the city council as regards design review and general unspoken standards does change over time, so that makes it it's kind of a constantly evolving atmosphere that we're all working in. I've worked in planning for 20 years in a number of different cities, mostly outside of design review settings, and I've always given recommendations, and boards and commissions and city councils were never hesitant about voting against one of my recommendations, and I never felt bad about it. It's true that we are here to serve the purpose, and part of our purpose of working with applicants so much is to bring them to a place where we think the board will approve their project. There's no question that that's paramount, but there are just times when people will reasonable people will disagree about a project, and another function of having hearings is not just that the public has input, but so that there is a board or a panel empowered with final decision-making power to give kind of a many more voices, to the decision, to give many more perspectives. So I think that we did some kind of back-of-the-envelope calculations, and certainly in the majority of times, staff and the board's staff's recommendation is echoed by the board's decision. Sometimes you'll add more conditions or not, but for the most part, we are in line. So I guess, in this section here, I don't really have a lot more to say than that. We really kind of wanted to get your input of, are there cases you see, or trends that you see, rather, where you think staff's analysis is off, or does it even bother you if staff has a different opinion?
I didn't mean to say that the staff was wrong.
Well,
just two different ways of looking at the same thing.
Absolutely.
And one day maybe I'll wake up and look at it differently. But it's not to say one is right or wrong. But it's just a alignment issue that it's hard, and I don't have an answer. It's very hard to predict at any point.
I think the struggle is a lot of the I've been here maybe a few months, but the applicants, I wish the staff spent a little bit more time to bring the passion, or I think the applicants lacking research. Like we had one instance with the design-wise, the style, Craftsman, Spanish, French, whatever style they wish, their clients. I think it's lacking the research, and we should educate them, the architecture, bring the passion back to the applicant or the designer or the architect. Why don't you bring some sample of that particular style that you wish to design, and with the staff, and we do it all the time, and then we say, well, let's look over the details, that we always struggle with the details, the craftsman details and all that. Why don't you bring in and make this project more significant, instead of faking craftsman like that plaza we had a few months ago. That will help the design, that will make the applicant happier, and everyone will be handling the crit much smoother and on a higher level. I think that's what it's missing: the research and passion and time, instead of cookie cutters.
Well, if I may, one of the issues that we struggle with sometimes with certain applicants is what staff, like I said, staff is quite upfront about telling the applicants what we think our recommendation will be about their proposed design. And examples such as the one you just raised about a particular architectural style is actually often a point of contention. For example, we might get a proposal for in a place where the existing house is a ranch-style home, and the proposal is to enlarge the house, and the predominant style in the neighborhood is ranch style, and the applicant disagrees with staff whether or not that will be a deviation from the style of the house. And then oftentimes it starts from whether or not they want to get a DRB exemption, and they want staff to agree with them that this does not meet the threshold, and our threshold is quite low. If we think the proposal is such that it really deserves vetting, a public vetting of the proposal, we think it should not be exempt from DRB, and it should go to DRB. And first step of the way, usually between us and the applicant, is no, it's not subject to exemption. You need to go to DRB. And once we get to that, we get through a whole process of what they want us to recommend, and the details of the recommendation that staff writes down. And their contention is that staff's recommendation, staff's argument has some weight with the DRB and with the public, and they often oftentimes ask for a more favorable discussion. And so we spent quite a bit of time going back and forth and then we do our piece of doing the education, as you said, and sometimes some people get offended that who is staff to tell me something about architecture. So this is the time for us to really put it on the table. So what we are asking, and like we said, one of the things we measure is that staff tries to be 1 or 2 or 3 notches under the level of rigor that the DRB expects. So we try to make our recommendations perhaps come 75%, 80% of what we think you will say, so that you'll also have the chance to put those final pieces. That's really how we measure ourselves. So a lot of the work is done ahead of time. So one of the things that would be helpful to us is if you tell us, are we achieving that? Should we go a little bit more rigorous or less rigorous? Do you want a little bit more level of comment and analysis from staff? Do you want a few more occasions where we recommend denial, for example?
I think. I think in a general comment, I think it is being achieved. I think that one concern that I have is a lot of times when applicants do come in front of us and have gone through the process, their assumption is that they've already met with the staff, they've made the changes and recommendations, so we have to approve it just because they met all the requirements and all, And I think there's a misconception of the whole idea of when you guys go through the process and when it comes in front of us, we need to approve it just because you guys are approving it. Yeah. So I think that clarification needs to be addressed at some level and some way to the applicants that it's not anywhere close to be approved. And so I don't know if that gets the message.
Well, we're glad that you've clearly articulated it here and now. We are very clear that we, unfortunately, our crystal ball broke a couple years ago, and we do our best to predict what the board will say and give advice based on that. Right. But we are always clear that the board can disagree with us, and sometimes does. We do try to get it closer more of the time. Just one point that Board Member Zervian made, where there have been times where staff has led or directed or suggested the applicant move in one direction and the board has gone in a different direction. That's happened a couple of times recently that I can think of, and in those particular cases, the staff had worked with the scope of the project as the applicant had brought it in. So if there was,
there are exceptions. They're not the
and
common.
they are the exceptions. We think we're hearing that you think so too. But that is sort of an interesting thing that's popped up recently, where the board, of course, can question the scope and say, well, maybe you should take down more of your existing house or take down this or that garage and move the project to a different part of the site, where staff will typically accept the scope as defined by the applicant and do our best to work with the applicant to help it meet with the board's expectations.
Yeah, no, first of all, I'd like to say that I think the staff is doing a great job. There's no question about it. I think what Mr. Haghani said, 75% is exactly, in my opinion, where the staff should be, because even our recommendations sometimes cannot become, we can never be 100%. But in order to be fair to the applicant and the process, I think being at 75% is a very good place to be.
Well, I just have one comment on that. Was it the intention of the council that you give a recommendation? It was.
That was the direction.
Okay, because it just seems like it. It's almost an unnecessary imposition onto what the presentation could be. But if that was the intention of the council, that's fine.
Let me just reiterate, that came out of the community's concern that there was really little transparency, because in the past, pretty much staff pinned up the project at whatever level of rawness or process design that it came to us, and staff said this is a proposal, and then the design review board would proceed to move the project forward. And there was a level of exhaustion on part of the public to see, especially on the cases where they needed a lot of work, where the DRB itself became the place where the design would be improved substantially. So the council really was interested in staff working with the applicants to take a lot of that initial work out of the hearing process, so you would really do the fine-tuning and the refining of the project in here. As opposed
I can understand that, though, but are you saying that council gave you that stick in order to push them through that process? I mean, it seems like you could do all of that without having the additional requirement of making an opinion on it. Or are you saying you need that stick of wanting to get your approval on it to keep them in the process working with you? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I
Is it necessary to keep, could you still be cycling through to improve the design without the stick of your approval? I'm getting the shake head, okay.
The answer is
That's
no.
not the answer.
I've got to be very upfront with you. Sometimes the only tool we have with certain applicants
Fair
is
enough.
to tell them staff will not recommend approval. And until we say that, there will be no movement, because we will keep getting the same design presented to us.
Fair enough, okay. I was being naive there just for a second. I apologize.
Next.
Okay, and one more topic in this general discussion area is some people have voiced concern about the board itself. Some members of the public have voiced concern about the board itself approving projects that maybe should be worked on a little bit more. And we're going to go into, in a minute, the number of reviews that the board, the number of cracks you can take at a project. But I guess I would also just like to call to your attention that I think it's human nature to not want to deny a project. You want to work with the people. You want to give them what they want in some fashion that's going to be acceptable to them and to the neighborhood, and that's a perfectly admirable impulse. I would just ask you to think that if you return something for redesign, that means that the property owner has to pay all new application fees all over again. Sometimes they have to pay new postage fees all over again. They have to produce all new plans, which is exactly what would happen if you just denied a project. I mean, from the property owner's perspective, it's kind of not that much different. So,
Yeah, but
put that thought out there.
that's not an. I mean, if it's returned for redesign for a specific reason and it comes back to us and it's fixed, then we have a approved project. So I don't think that's the.
That takes us to the next topic, which is the number of reviews that you get with a project. Originally, when we were making recommendations prior to last year to the City Council and the number of times that the DRB could visit the same project, we had recommended 3 times, up to 3 times. And the City Council cut that down to 2 times for a very specific reason. They were also hearing from a number of community members about the cases where the same design or with minor modifications kept coming back to the design review board with little change, no matter how much the design review board gave directions to make substantial changes, the same would happen. And sometimes, again, the idea was that sometimes the DRB would be worn out of seeing the same thing, eventually would approve it. So the City Council wanted to limit that particular potential. And they said 2 times, so that 1 time you could send them back to return for redesign, and then the second time you could approve or deny. And we think, to a large extent, the Council's intention to remove the applicant's tendency to repeat the same design has actually been impacted by that. So fewer applicants try that. So more applicants are more likely, after the first design review process, to go and change the design and follow your directions so that the second time around, hopefully they'll get an approval. So we think that the City Council's intention has actually been fulfilled to a large extent, but there are some cases where we get to the second round, and to the end of the process, and the design review board and staff and the applicant are all just very close to getting that final design approved, and everybody feels obliged to somehow get to an approval. And sometimes staff might come in with a recommendation with several conditions, and you might take those conditions and add a couple more. Sometimes we think it's perhaps better for the design review board to have the opportunity to say, it's almost there, but not exactly. We would like to see it a third time. Or you might say, these are the additional conditions that we want to give.
Can we do that?
Well, this is what we're proposing. We're proposing a change. We're proposing that either the design review board or staff could recommend a third visit on those cases alone, that you think they've come so close that one more visit would actually be worthwhile, but not the applicant.
And I think the last project that we looked at is a great example to bring up to the council, because personally, I think a year or two ago, I would not even think twice to return that for redesign. Right now, I left everything up to the staff to make sure that all the siding is done properly, all the colors are done properly, all the railings. I mean, we've literally redesigned and changed that entire project without even asking or thinking that we want to see it again. And maybe that the second time around, it's going to be, maybe worse than what we started with in the beginning. And so where do we go then? But we left so much up to the staff to take care of that, and I think that having that option there, I think it definitely will help.
Yeah, sorry.
I think staff has encouraged us to do that. I mean, to add conditions, and you're comfortable with adding those conditions on it. But I do think that you mentioned it on this other topic, if you could think of a way so that second round wasn't as onerous, if there was a way of really seeing what that submittal is, and what that person could do, and how they could be sort of fast-tracked, date certain or something, I think they would be acceptable to having it happen. I think it would, I think that could help move it along. I think sometimes it is back for redesign. It can be onerous. You got the whole package together, you're back in line. I mean, there's a lot of negatives when you give some back for redesign. But I think if you streamlined it, focus on the elements, maybe the drawings, maybe we specify the drawings we need, we give them a date certain with if it's back at a certain time, I think that would make that redesign happen better.
One thing, what I had written down with respect to this question was that I think there are some projects that are more complex, and it's like asking to bake the cake in 30 minutes or less. Not every cake can be done in the same way. So we have to recognize that that's one aspect that's very real with respect to some projects that are extremely complex, and we cannot even kind of leave this meeting and feeling like, did we give them the right direction, or did we really convey exactly what we felt should be done? Which leads me to the second part of this, the clarity of our recommendations plays a tremendous part in how these things develop in one direction or another. I don't think, personally, and I'm telling this about our own board, sometimes we're not very clear about what we're asking. We think we are, but later when I review it, and I think that it could be interpreted in many different ways.
Well, that's a perfect segue. And as you mentioned, the project that we just heard, for example, that was a much longer hearing than we expected, because we heard a number of things that we wrote down and then asked for very precise and very specific direction on. So that's something that as we've gone through the process, we've learned to do a bit better by making sure we read back to you what we've heard and confirm it from you. Just before we go on to the next topic, one guideline that we try to use when we're writing up the recommendation and conditions and staff report is that if the conditions are really focused on what we think of as the third level of category, the first being site planning, the second being mass and scale, the third being materials and details, if all of the comments that staff has and that ultimately the board has is focused on materials and details, we've noticed that the board appears comfortable conditioning those items and leaving those to staff. What we've also noticed, however, is that if staff has major concerns with massing, which is something that we do focus on, that's when we will tend to have the return for redesign recommendation or lean towards that, or not, as you say, encourage an approval with conditions. So that's sort of the guideline that we've been going by.
I think just following on the recommendation that you guys want to take to the council, I think for that special cases that we would say that the third return for redesign is required, I think you need to add something there in regards to continuing certain project. I think there are certain things there that continuation could help us too. We don't have that luxury right now.
Well, I think we would look at, in our proposal to the City Council, we will identify very specific situations where the design review board, a board member could ask the rest of the board if they would agree to do that, or staff could recommend the board to consider that, and we would list out some specific situations, because again, we want to stick with the City Council's original intention to not give some applicants this opportunity to say, well, let me just disagree with staff on this one. Maybe if the design review board doesn't agree with me, I guess they can come for the third time. So, but yes, and we would do it as a way of continuance, so it won't be a brand new application fee and a brand new notice, and we will make it a streamlined process. But I think that takes us to the record of decision, which Vilya is going to talk.
Yes, and as was just briefly mentioned, I mean, essentially the record of decision is immortalizing your opinions and your determination. And for not only staff purposes, but also for the applicant's best interest, and as well as for the board's, the more precise you are in terms of your language, as Board Member Zarifian was saying, the easier it is for not only staff to then implement the conditions of approval, but also have the applicant understand, because there's a big difference between what might have been a previous condition of approval as in reduce the massing, which we might have had on a record of decision 5 or 10 years ago, just reduce the massing in a return for redesign, as opposed to reduce the height, reduce the bulk on the north elevation, allow for greater articulation in order to reduce the boxiness of the proposed structure. And so, you'll notice that in the last several months, staff has made a concerted effort to take down your opinions and then actually read back as part of the record of decision, and then also obviously enumerating it also in the record of decision that we send out to the applicants themselves, making sure that we have understood, not only as staff, but that the applicant has understood as well, the conditions of approval, whether it be to the architectural detail, to certain design standards, or whatnot, landscaping, parking, the lighting, or the other various items that the design review board typically has conditions of approval. And this would be not only for the record of decisions for return for redesign, because we're ultimately using your return for redesign comments, considerations, and conditions in order to then evaluate the revised proposal, but as well as that leads to the record of decision when it's an approval with conditions, because oftentimes your approval with conditions, those are the conditions that staff and the applicant have to address before allowing the project to proceed into plan check. And obviously, the more specific you are, whether it's in regards to window details or flashing or roof materials, the better we're able to go ahead and make sure that that has been accomplished prior to the project going into plan check. Again, we would also, forgive me, if there are, and sometimes we'll have a very complicated case and there be multiple opinions voiced, we want to make sure that your record of decision is obviously supported by all the members. Make sure that your opinions and comments are taken down in specific detail and accurately represented by the planner. But there's also been a suggestion made that if we cannot do so directly right after your determination, there's the possibility of either allowing for a recess, and that to allow staff, sometimes the conditions of approval or the return for redesign comments and conditions are rather lengthy, and so we can either come back after a short recess or come back at the end of the meeting and then have the board make a decision at the very end, as opposed to waiting for staff, because sometimes when you have so
But
many
it has to be done that day, correct?
We would prefer to have it done that day, simply because if you are continuing your record of decision, it would be continuing it for an additional 2 weeks, and then also having the 15-day appeal period. So it really lengthens the process, and not only that, but you would be if you were to continue the record of decision for the next hearing date, you would still be maintaining that, keeping that hearing on that item open, essentially. So, with that said, I would like to turn it over.
If I may interject
Yes.
on the comments about the record of decision, there's also an aspect of it not only helping staff and the applicants understand what the board's intention was, but it's also goes towards the issue of public transparency about under which criteria did the board make their decision when they either approved a project or denied a project. That goes back to why staff is making a recommendation and a thorough analysis that based on a set of common criteria, the board has made this decision to approve the project or deny the project or return it for redesign with these conditions. So it's important that that record of decision is exactly what it says. It explains to the public who might come 6 months later why the board made the determination that they did.
I understand. Next.
Sorry. So that takes us to this next topic, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, we go through this whole process whether or not a project could be exempt. We go through a similar process at the end as well. After you make your decisions and you give the conditions, then the applicant and the planner work together to make sure that the intentions of your decision are met. And from time to time, we come to a project where we think the changes that they made along the construction process were so significant that they have deviated from your decision. And from time to time, we get into these severe arguments with those applicants, and that they want us to give final sign-off, and we refuse to give final sign-off. And once in a while, a project stays in impasse between staff and the applicants. And we say we will not give final sign-off, and you will have to go back to the design review board, and they could just stand hanging and not proceed with an application to come before the design review board, so that we could ask you if you agree or disagree with staff. We think, and then along the same lines, there are cases where we have given a DRB exemption at the beginning because the proposed design was so minor that we thought it didn't meet the requirements of going before the design review board. And in the process, they changed it so much that it's so different than what exemption staff gave them. In both those cases, we would like to recommend to the City Council that staff should be caught in the code, authorized to, when we get to the point where we completely disagree with the applicant, we have the authority to schedule a public hearing and schedule that case for design review board review, and we will present our case to you that we think this is not consistent with your final decision, and you can tell us it is or it isn't. Either way, we're fine. If you disagree with us, we're fine, but we would like to have that opportunity, and we wanted to hear your feedback on that particular angle.
I think I agree. It's similar to what South Pasadena has, a similar action, which sometimes during construction they change from to vinyl type windows, and you had an approved case wood metal cladded window, and they're very enforceable, and then the contractor goes and changes, and hoping that by playing the hardship and begging that the city will allow them. So it goes back, and the city will represent, like you suggested, present it back to the board for redesign, actually. So you have to do the resubmittal elevations, like you do it as an initial design review submittal. You do it again with paying the fees all over again, reviewing, and then present it to DRB, and it could go either way. So I agree with you. I think we should do it.
Hassan, the way I see the process of going through design review is to basically control the design and what an applicant is trying to do, and make sure that it is consistent, it's done in quality, and it's keeping with the neighborhood. I recall several projects that has come in front of us in past 7-8 years that it's due to the same reasoning. At some cases, I completely agreed with the staff that they had deviated and we had to look at that. But at certain projects, they deviated towards better. For example, they were specifying vinyl windows and they were replacing wood windows. They decided once they saw it, they replaced it with wood windows. But yet it was deviated from what we had approved. I think as a staff, once they look at the project and once as a senior staff reviews it, they should be able to make an educated decision of what level of changes they have made. Obviously, and I can go back to the record of decision, I think being that it is very transparent, if there was discussion, specific discussion for certain areas of the house or building that we had full discussion of, that we wanted specific look at that area, and during the construction they followed to the T everywhere except that section that we specified that we wanted specifically a copper downspouts or whatever it is, or we had a whole discussion, and if they made those changes, then I agree, then it comes back. But I think staff should make certain judgment of what is actually coming back and what they're putting people through, being that the intent of the design review is to make a quality, a nice architecture, nice building. And if the changes they have made has made it better or at the same level as what we have approved.
Well, I can say a couple of things about that, because the better or not is a big question, because we come across those in at least three scenarios that I can think of. One is that the changes are a real improvement and they're not a deviation from the actual architectural style and language that was discussed, and that staff could really see that this is an improvement. But sometimes the improvement is, the changes are so significant that a neighbor who was at the hearing might notice that this is so different than what I thought the DRB approved. We sometimes are at a quandary at that moment, because we know this is an improvement, but this is so different that we still think, at a minimum, we could take it back to the DRB and say, this has changed, we think to the better, and we still wanted you to know this and the neighbors to know that staff knows this is different, but we think it's a good change. That's the first and probably the easiest one. Then we have those that the improvements are not necessarily to the better, and I think we agree on that. And then we have this whole third category of changes that one architectural style transforms into a completely different architectural style.
That goes back to the second.
And, yes, and intelligent people could disagree on this one. Maybe they will think this new architectural style is even better, but we think the changes are so drastic that it's not a question of better or worse, but the expectations have not been met at all because it's a completely different house.
I think there's a fourth category there too. If you want to get into the categories, I think there instance that the intent of the design review have been met in a certain level that have been impacted by the existing building, the structure, or other elements that do come into play. For example, they've made changes to the windows, they made changes to the height and other aspects of that makes minor changes, but yet it's still at the same intent. How does that get addressed?
Well,
Can I say one thing on that? It might be helpful, and it may let you bring those up more often. You might treat it just like you would do, like I have too many attorneys in my family. Everything is an appeal, like an appeal process. It could be that you bring something up just with photos to an end of a DRB meeting, maybe with some of the people who had talked about it, and maybe that's sort of the first triage you do. Like maybe if you have the consent of a DRB member, maybe that's what triggers it to the next step of maybe it becoming something.
But most of the time, those changes are for the worse, not for the better.
No, I'm saying if there was a question. I mean, obviously it was, I don't know, if there was a good
One way to do what you said, Mr. Garagos, would be to actually come up with a process whereby the DRB would assign a subcommittee for like 1 year of 2 of you perhaps, that would be authorized by the rest of the DRB to work with staff in working that. One thing we did prior to the City Council changing that, we would often call the DRB member who seemed to be most passionate about that issue and get their comment, and that caused all sorts of mischief and problems for us, because the rest of the DRB would think, well, I wasn't involved in that discussion, and just because that DRB member agrees, so, and then some members of the council, the public also criticized us. I think that's an option. We could probably present that we will present that to the City Council as a subcommittee of the DRB. You could designate 2 of you for a whole period of year, and then we maybe change that every year, and then those 2 people would be authorized to follow up with us. That would be
I'm saying, so there was a
Are we
mechanism.
going to get paid?
So there was a simple mechanism that you could sort of triage stuff, and then
That's actually a very good suggestion. Not to belabor the point, but there's maybe a 5th category that I'd just like to highlight, because it's come up more and more recently, where because typically if there's, say, a structural column where a window needs to be moved 1 foot, this is the kind of thing that happens regularly in construction. We're aware of it. Often senior staff doesn't have to look at it. The planner will, work with the applicant. If we get a series of those types of changes, like 15 or 20 of this window moved, that window's larger, and this or that change is not necessarily substantial, but if you look at the whole building and compare it to what was approved, it looks really different. And so we get a lot of pressure from our applicants, because often they're in the middle of construction and they want their framing sign off. And it's really almost impossible for us to, well, it is impossible because right now staff isn't authorized to bring it back before you. So having the ability of, a subcommittee to say, yes, this needs to go back before the board, that would be very, very helpful for us.
I think we need to move on. We're losing our public, I think, slowly. So I do want to hear the public. So
We only have one last item, and that's just to quickly wrap up. Obviously, one of the last thresholds is having staff do a plan check before the plans actually are approved for the building permit. The 2 other last remaining times to ensure that the design review board conditions are being met would be during the framing inspection. It would be, and again, framing inspections are only for single-family homes, so staff is called out by the applicant. We do a framing inspection. We take a look at the height of the building, location, windows, doorways, whatnot, and essentially the work cannot proceed. The building cannot obtain their framing approval until the design review board framing inspection has been approved. In the case of commercial, industrial, and multifamily residential zones, there's only the final design review board. And again, so the single-family residential homes have 2 inspections. One would be at the framing stage, and the other one would be at the final stage. For commercial, it's only, in multifamily and industrial, it's only at the very end for the final. The final inspection would include ensuring that all of the design review board conditions of approval have been met, that the project is consistent with the approved set of plans, all that the landscaping has been installed, the exterior finishes have been done per the approved set of plans, hardscape is in. So essentially the project is in a move-in ready condition. So this would even be prior to temporary occupancy, whatnot, but the final design review board inspection would have to be approved before the building permit is finalized by the building department. So there would be additional levels to ensure that the approved design review board project is in compliance with what was approved by the DRB. With that said,
This concludes our discussion. If you'd like to add anything that we missed, we would be happy to take those, and of course, we will be expecting to hear from
Suggestions can be made now or later.
now or later, because what we will do after this study session and the next study session with the other DRB is that we will compile all of your comments in a staff report and the comments that we hear from the public, and then we'll make recommendations to the City Council.
Maybe we should have.
Well, let's have the public, and then we can go with the final suggestion and maybe wrap up. Unfortunately, I think we lost Marina Stanley. So, Bob, too? You're going to withdraw? Okay. Is it Larry Barnes?
would you prefer to give a time frame?
I think he waited here long.
You waited.
I don't need more than 3 hours.
We're here all night.
Oh, we were going to suggest
Okay.
4 hours.
I'm Larry Barnes. I'm president of the Chevy Chase Homeowners Association. Unfortunately, took over for the passing of Dick Murray. But it seems to me, I guess my comments, and I must admit I'm a bit brain dead at this point in time after 3 hours, but I relate it into two sections, one to staff and one to the design review board itself. I have nothing but the greatest respect for the amount of work that you all do as volunteers, unpaid volunteers, just as I am. I have great respect for what the staff does. But I do think that indeed we fall into the trap of just business as usual. We fall into a trap of continuing what we've done before, we're going to continue to do again. And so if I look in terms of I have about 9 points that I would like to make, and I will be brief, is that there is, from a staffing standpoint, there is, I believe, an issue of communications. Clearly, this meeting was noticed at 5 p.m., and except, Hassan, your apology for that, was supposed to start at 5 o'clock, the study session, so started at 7. But there's also, I think there's a perception in the community that indeed those of us who email, those of us who send in letters, that indeed I'm not sure that there is a perception that they are being adequately reviewed by the boards and the commissions that they go before.
That's a very good point. I need to talk about.
Because there is never any feedback, and I'm a Channel 6 junkie, there's never any feedback that indeed we've gotten letters, and that there, or any response to that letter, or any response to that piece of communication.
Very good point.
So I do believe that communications is an issue that needs to be addressed. Secondly, I think that there needs to be addressed, and as I watch design review boards, and I'm not sure if it was this one or number one, is that I continue to have a major issue with the sequencing of conditional use permits and DRB. That oftentimes a project will come before the DRB, before the CUPs or the environmental impacts have actually been completed. And I've heard design review boards particularly, and again, recognize I'm out of Chevy Chase Canyon, so we're dealing with hillside issues, oftentimes outside of the hillside ordinance. And I hear issues that impact design that should have been predetermined by an adequate CUP. So I think from a staffing standpoint, not from your guys' standpoint, but from your standpoint, that indeed, if indeed there's going to be a substantial issue around zoning and the CUP and the necessity for either an environmental impact report
and/or some kind of a variance, that indeed that be established before you guys waste your time reviewing, or the architect reviewing their time, designing a piece of property that may or may not be able to be built. There is clearly, my role is to balance the protection of the neighborhood and the protection of individual property rights. I mean, that's what we all try to do. Because as an individual property owner, we all feel we should be able to build whatever we really want to build. Now, that is not appropriate for the community, clearly. But there is that general underlying feeling that I'm sure you guys really struggle with all of the time. Our big issues are really around compatibility. And a lot of what you do is not only make that craftsman really a true craftsman and designed to be a true craftsman, but is a craftsman compatible with the neighborhood that it's being proposed to be being set into. Around compatibility, we have the mansionization issue, and I receive notices of all DRB meetings that are coming up, and I notice that almost always substantial square footage is being added to a piece of property in terms of living space. That's kind of the trend of today. Well, waiting for the council to give us input around, mansionization and privacy issues is kind of like waiting for the council to give us direction around fence ordinances. I'll probably be long and gone myself before those are ever addressed. But I would recommend that, I think Board Member Zarifian said it well, that there has to be research for the surrounding properties. That indeed, for you to make a decision in a vacuum, and in fact, I will be joining an appeal to the City Council around DRB1 because I don't think that was ever considered. In fact, I know it wasn't considered because I read the record. That indeed, if indeed that the Design Review Board had put a property into perspective by the property right next door, their conclusion might have been totally different. It was never shown on the plan. So we talked about additional research being done. I think staff should be required to talk to each of the individual neighbors, the two surrounding neighbors, and have input from the neighbors around the design before it ever comes to you guys. Because we're impacting people that in a sterile environment that where decisions are made like this, we're impacting people's lives, and at the very least, a conversation should be made by staff to each of the surrounding immediate neighbors to a given piece of property. Because I think that would help the staff recommendation and the recommendations that come to you. I think that again, it's important to hear all sides of an issue. So those are just some of the, I have one other issue around staff, and that's the inspection process. I live across the street from what I call the Big Dig on Chevy Chase Drive, where there was basically a cutout of a slope that, and particularly on an uphill slope that is too steep and has been approved through a CUP, that indeed was stopped for an unsafe work environment. The cut was improperly made. That property sat for 4 months. Now, Mr. Tom in Public Works has told me that indeed additional inspections can be made in that kind of situation. To my knowledge, that proposal has not moved forward. And I do believe that has to, again, be part of the inspection process, not only at framing, because at framing on an uphill slope, it's too late. That project stopped for 5 months while it had to be rectified, and I think additional inspections would have helped that too. So I'm not sure that the inspection process is indeed complete or totally covered in all aspects.
Are you talking about the project on Chevy Chase?
On Chevy Chase, the 2312 Chevy Chase.
That had to do with the grading, but that had nothing.
Well, it was a grading, but the fact is that a hillside should not be cut before it's basically there's some kind of an inspection there.
Right.
As it relates to the DMB, and I realize that you have additional speakers, so I will try to move on.
Actually, we lost all of them. So.
Oh, we lost all of them.
You're it.
I'm it? Oh,
Right.
okay. I guess I'm persistent if nothing else, is that sitting here tonight, I think we need to be careful as to defining what the role of the DRB is. And I think there's a fine line, and I'm not being critical because I recognize that I may have to stand before you very gentlemen in the future on an issue.
So be nice.
I'm trying to be constructive.
Be careful.
I did not hear a delineation between personal taste and good design. I heard words such as, I don't like peach. That's a personal opinion. That's not really a design opinion. I heard things like that, and I think the Design Review Board has to be careful to articulate design issues, because I agree with what you said. If it's going to be a craftsman, and just because I understand what a craftsman is, it should be a craftsman. It shouldn't be a bastardized craftsman. And so I agree with that as to how you go through that process. But again, I think that we need to be careful. I come from a creative industry, retired out of the advertising industry, and I hear all the time, I don't like peach, or I don't like this kind of ad, or I don't like that kind of ad. It's personal opinion as opposed to good design. And so if we can encourage both DRB1 and DRB2, keep it to a design level, I think that's going to ease the frustration of the homeowner. Because again, if I'm representing both protection of the neighborhood and I'm representing protection of individual property rights as a homeowners association, it seems to me that indeed we owe it to our constituencies to make sure that indeed that we're very focused on what it is we're trying to have as an outcome. And I also think it's important as we go through this process, as you're making recommendations to the City Council, that we understand the difference between process and outcome. Because you guys do a great job of outcome. And I've never seen, I'm a layman. That property on the back board there looks pretty darn good to me, but then again, I'm not a professional like you are. I am a professional communicator. And so I do believe that we have to be very careful as to how we communicate to the public through Channel 6 or through people sitting out here in the audience to make sure that indeed they maintain the respect that you all deserve. So again, that was just some points sitting here tonight. That second half are things that I didn't come prepared to talk about, but and obviously we all have personal feelings. We all have personal opinions. And I think when it is a personal opinion, it should be stated as a personal opinion as opposed to a certified recommendation. I also think it'd be very careful for staff to delineate between considerations and conditions and observations. I heard it thrown around here like crazy. If I was this poor architect, I wouldn't know what the hell to do. I really wouldn't. And I'm a pretty good listener. And so he will read, I'm sure, whatever you guys proliferate in terms of the findings. But coming out of it, and what you have to realize is that the audience, the people of Glendale, don't read your findings.
Mr. Barnes, you need to speak into the mic.
What they get is Channel 6. We're sitting back here. And if they're like me, they would probably leave this meeting confused. You guys know what you were saying. I'm not sure the public really does. So maybe there's another place where indeed that staff can actually summarize what we thought we heard. And I think that was one of your recommendations as well. So with that, I'll sit down.
One of the things I like to mention is that I totally agree with you in terms of the issue of preferences. I think it should be part of our process that every statement we make should follow by a rational description of why it helps the design rather than just leaving it as a preference. I think that's of utmost importance to our process because that will take away a lot of guesswork for the architect, for the owner, for the audience, and so on. So that's a very good point you made. The other.
Well, do you have a question for him? Or we can talk about it.
No, but I'd like to clarify something that was said. The issue in terms of the adjacent properties, I think we always care about the people who live next door because they're the ones that are mostly impacted. But the way we evaluate it is very important, and we should base it on actual drawings that become a record of the actual condition. So no one guesses anything.
Correct. It's sometimes, if indeed staff actually had conversations with those neighbors, that might provide you better information or amplified information as to what the impact of the design might have on their house, where you can't see that if you're operating in a vacuum.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, would you like us to actually say a few things in response to Mr.
Sure.
Barnes?
I do have a couple of comments, but yeah, if you want to go ahead.
We would love to hear your comments before we go.
Well, I really appreciate the input, and I think it's been very helpful. It's been probably the most helpful comments that I have received. And as far as bringing personal taste versus reviewing the design as a whole and not putting your personal taste, it is very difficult. It is very difficult not to bring your personal opinion. And I've been doing this for past 8 years, and so I've learned my lesson. I've gotten a lot of calls for putting my personal opinion on the line. But the beauty of this body is that we have 5 people, and if you don't have your personal opinion or of take on a specific element, I really don't care about colors as long as it's not really something extravagant within the community, the area that it's going in. I think it's just a way of how you present it. I think you want to hear a board members' thoughts about the design. So, like it or not, you're going to hear their thoughts or personal feeling about the project. So it's just how they present it. We're designers. We're not. We're great communicators as far as showing on paper, looking at projects, designing. So I think that has always been a challenge for all of us, and particularly for myself. But as far as the email, I really like to talk about that. We do have an account, a city account, but this darn thing expires every 30 days. and to renew this thing, it just drives me crazy, and I just gave up on that. Every 30 days it expires, and I have to call in and get a whole new renewal on this. And I've been wanting to say this thing, but it's just... And one thing I asked them to do, and they said there's absolutely no way we can do it, is because it is a city email, I have to log in from the internet and so forth. I was hoping that I can get that link to my personal email, so whenever I get the email, I get notification on my personal email that I do have an email there, or it just gets transferred to my personal, so I can get that. And that is not possible, I've been told. So I don't understand why. All these technology out there is just... And so I apologize. I know that we've been getting emails, but the only time that I do get it is the copy that I get in front of me. And I've tried many, many times, but it gets expired. And I just gave up on how many times I have to call some. But other than that, I'll leave it up.
But no, again, in terms of the preference versus a rational kind of argument, I think everything we say and do has a personal base.
Right.
There's no other way to describe it. But I think we should put that in a rational context, so that it will be able to describe why it's a better direction than the status quo. If we can describe our preferences in a rational way, then it becomes effective and constructive. But if we just say, I don't necessarily like, or something in that nature, I don't think anyone can benefit from it. That's for example, if a lighter color is preferred, you can describe that maybe it lightens up this mass as and some people might agree or not, but at least you have described why you think that certain decision will make it better or worse.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Barnes raised a number of issues that I think are. Thank you very much for raising them, because this gives us an opportunity to address some of them, and especially the ones that we were not aware were going on. With regard to communications, and with regard in terms of, let me actually tell you something about the IS system here. We do not know what restrictions they have. We will communicate what you said to them, and I cannot make any promises.
Sure.
I can tell you that from my house, I also have to log in, and there's no way that they can connect directly to my computer.
No, logging is fine, but it just the
and the expiration, I don't really know what the rationale is for that, and we'll have a conversation.
Every 30 days
with them.
after renewal.
But in terms of the communications that we get from the public on specific cases, we have a cutoff point that if the communication gets to us before we post the staff report and send them to the design review boards, we send them to the design review boards and we post them on our website at the same time. If we receive the emails and the communication, we'll attach them to the staff report, and if you go on the website, you'll see the communication we received prior to that date. So that's always there. As far as what the design review board says about them, etc., we do not have much of a control. But what we do is that we mention in our staff presentation that we have received emails or letters, and but we also get a wave of letters or emails sometimes the day prior to the public hearing, and people are often surprised that we have not included them in our staff report. The reason is that we sent our staff report the week prior, and whatever we received the day before the public hearing, all we can do is bring them to the design review board that day, and we oftentimes at the microphone, the case planner says, and we have received communications from these people. So that's how we address that, and that's the best we can do, and we apologize if it's not sufficient. With regard to communicating with the neighbors, the way that we do that is that now we have several ways that we notice the neighbors, and we have the case planner's name and phone number on the notice. I'm afraid it's not quite possible for us, in addition to the noticing, for the case planner to make a point of making his personal call or visit to the neighbors around every property. That would be a little bit beyond what we can do. We will pass this communication to the City Council. We will not dismiss it. But I must say that practically the number of cases that we follow, what we can do is make the case planner available. Members of the public who receive the notice, if reading a staff report is a complicated issue, we understand that, because our staff reports are very technical. We invite people to call the case planner and set up a time or come and visit and actually have an interaction about the case. We will make sure that the comments get passed on. Now, we don't always guarantee that the neighbors' concerns will take priority over the applicant's concerns, but we will address those, and they're always addressed in the staff report. And then in terms of inspection process, that I think you raised some things that are a combination of building inspections and planning. We're working with them to kind of coordinate that, and that's not a perfect process, and we understand your concerns. Am I missing anything else?
Actually, Mr. Barnes spoke about the CUP and EIR.
Oh, yes. And Mr. Barnes, the way that we're going to make it take a check out our process and see if we have actually made any mistakes. But the way that our process is set up to be done is exactly the sequencing that you said was making sense. So if we are bringing something before the design review board prior to the CUP hearing, that's either a mistake on our staff's part. If we have made that mistake, we'll correct it. But we are also sometimes we bring something for preliminary review by the design review board. And that could happen before the CUP process. That's just, as Tim Foy was explaining before, sometimes there is a confusion between the preliminary review and the actual design review board review. The preliminary, from time to time, we get an applicant that before they even apply for the CUP, they want to get a sense of the design from the design review board before they invest all that money. And sometimes the neighbors do not know that that's not an actual design review approval, but that's the preliminary review. Other than that, we should be following the sequencing that you did, and if we will double check to see if we have made any mistakes in the past, we will correct that. We thank you for actually pointing that out. Anything else?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, historically, I mean, a number of years back, plans were not reviewed for a need for variance until they were ready to pull a building permit. And in the last 5 or 6 years here, we've instituted a system where we've asked planners to check for the need for variances up front before design review. If it's something that the applicant hasn't told staff about, or maybe the applicant's not even aware of it themselves. And, you know, every once in a while, a planner misses something and at the very end says, oh, shoot, they needed a variance for that. But hopefully that is the exception.
Without going into detail, there have been issues where...
Mr. Barnes, we can't,
The issues are few and far between, but they are significant, and so as you're asking for public input, you need to be careful. We're dealing with an issue right now of vacation of public land to a homeowner that should have probably been done prior to this whole process going on. It's going to work out just fine. But again, I think you're wasting these gentlemen's times and the public's times if indeed the sequencing is not correct. So there have been in the past, not 5 years, but the past 2 years while I've been actively involved, there have been numerous situations where this has come up.
Thank you.
As far as the mentionization and privacy issue Mr. Barnes brought up.
The mentionization and privacy issue is an ongoing issue. As you know, we've addressed that in the last 2 times we've addressed that was one with some amendments to the design review process and to the hillside ordinance and to the single-family ordinance. The City Council sifted through a lot of the issues that were raised around mansionization and then adopted certain things in the code and certain directions to the design review process. So we know that many members of the public are not satisfied and they'd like to see more. And we are going to address that again through the hillside ordinance and through a couple of other ordinances that we have, and we will keep addressing it until we get it right. And but that has come up, and we understand that it's not to everybody's satisfaction at this point, and we will keep raising it from different angles. And
all right.
Oh.
I think as a sum, I think are we done?
As
okay.
Just other issues, and I'll start with the simplest one, a suggestion. I think during the last couple of years, I've noticed that drawing something on the board is a taboo that we shouldn't do. But I truly believe that we need to have maybe a whiteboard on the side so that we can talk about architectural ideas by drawing something, and that helps the architect understand. I'll give you an example. For example, a lot of architects come before us and they say, but you guys keep asking us to break up the mass, and then we do it, and you still complain. But I think what's missing, for example, is that a clear idea of what that building diagram is, and you want to draw it and say, if you want to break it, you can break it, but within a certain kind of a constraint, and which will be aligned with the original idea. So we should be kind of using our own judgment in what we draw and what becomes our own desire to design for someone. We don't want to do that for sure.
The one thing is, I like the suggestion, but I think we need to find a medium or a technique that can be transferred as a hard copy or something that can
we'll
be
just
maintained. So,
scan it and put it in the file.
right, or something, or even this $1 million machine that has been off.
Electronic board should actually be helpful, but I think the best way to pass the concept would be a whiteboard, because we have said that it's a taboo to draw on people's drawing because they will take you very literally sometimes, and sometimes the concept gets lost in.
And offending some of the applicants of modifying their plans. So.
Yeah. The second suggestion I have is that I'm a member of the Pasadena and Foothill chapter of AIA, and this happens with other cities, for example, Pasadena, that they invite us for some of those projects that are crucial to the city as a whole, to participate and bring our expertise, because there are some very prominent architects that are part of the same board, and we can invite other people, which Glendale, by the way, is part of the same chapter's constituency, to talk about some of these projects, because the more we clarify directions and thoughts about certain projects, the public will and everyone will benefit from it. So that's something that we can maybe in future consider, because they're out there and they're becoming more and more involved in cities' development and issues that can be helpful to have one more set of eyes look at the same thing and say something. But the last one that I like to say is that our process, whether it's approved or rejected, and so it goes to an appeal board to review it by the two boards combined. And the last step, the final step, is that it goes to the city council to approve it or disapprove it, right? Or, I mean, as a general.
That used to be the case.
Yeah.
As of April of last year, the alternative assessment panel, or what would be used as the appeal board, was eliminated. And so now appeals from the design review board
goes before
right before the city council.
And I'm going to stick my neck out and say what I really believe. I think that the piece that needs to be eliminated is the city council, because they do and talk about architecture and things that we just talked about what we shouldn't do, and that's what happens. As long as it doesn't happen in that manner, that becomes a preference of I like this, I don't like that, then that defeats the purpose of us being here, because we have spent our lives trying to understand architecture, and if it's an ongoing struggle, and I think the city council's board role should be to evaluate exactly what's been talked about and say maybe that judgment sounds reasonable or not, rather than becoming a final. Fortunately, one of the council members is Laura Friedman, she used to be part of our board. So I think, I'm not saying that it defeats the purpose of us being here, but I think those kind of panels should be empowered more than they used to be. Now they're eliminated. So that's what I...
My thought I think going through some design process through City of Burbank, they have this process there that I think it's been really helpful for the whole the development process, and it's called the development review. I think one of the reasons that we may be getting some projects that after the DRB is done and the changes come about is because of the lack of involvement with other departments that do have influence in the overall site planning and the way that the projects are done. So I really encourage the council think about bringing the development review just simply a site plan, submitting it in, and letting all the departments have a look at it, and nothing in writing, but it's just in a week we meet and everybody feeds in their comments and thoughts, and it's been wonderful, and it eliminates any kind of surprises or anything that come about after design is done and the design review is, so then we get a final result after we have the chance to do it. So
I think coming to Alan, there was one city for DRB, they had to submit like site plan to all agencies, like even the police department, they submitted a plan for review for security purpose. I mean, you could imagine if each department, I know it's a lot of work, but like a police department and all those divisions, civil and public works and all that, they come up with a short list of comments. And then before it comes into getting into larger design process.
Just to expand a little bit on that, anytime you have an environmental review, and this would be for multifamily residential projects greater than 7 units, commercial and industrial projects greater than 10,000 square feet, requires environmental review according to CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act. All of those projects are circulated to all of the different departments, and as part of the environmental.
But what I'm trying,
Or you're
understand.
referring just to the site plan
But
itself.
what I'm saying is, that process, I've gone through it, I know what it is. It takes 2.5 to 3 months
For the environmental.
of environmental process. I'm talking about a week to 10-day turnaround, kind of a quick review. Here's a surprise here, here's an issue there. Even for residential homes, I mean, there's a lot of questions come about. There are projects there. Let the fire department make their comments, not wait until the DRB is approved, then it goes there, and then they have to make a whole new change, and then we're back to square one again, and you don't know if you need to approve it, bring it back to us, so.
We will follow through with that. We'll raise that to the other departments. Maybe what we can do, we can ask for 11 by 17 copies so we can share with the other departments. One thing that we have confronted is there's just the level of our review is the threshold is so low that we actually review sometimes just remodels at this level, where other cities really you need to reach a much higher threshold before such projects go to the other departments. Our threshold is quite low, so we can raise that. We can discuss that with other departments and see what we can come up with.
All right, I think anyone else? I think that's it.
Thank you for all your feedback.
Thank you. Adjourn.
And members of the public, thank you.